Thank you, Dominic. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our work session. It is 1:00. I will be facilitating the meeting this afternoon for about an hour. Mayor is unavailable. And so with that, will you please rise so we can say the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. Next up is our pet of the week. Is Vanessa around?
Hello, hey guys.
Hey, Vanessa.
All right. So first we have Elios. He's our dog of the week. He is a 3-year-old male. He is neutered already. Here's a little bit about him.
Vanessa, you can't see the
Vanessa. Yes, it's not up if you've shown a picture. We don't have it.
Let me try again.
Thank you, Councilor Bencomo.
All right. Do you see it now?
We don't.
No. All right, let's try again.
There we go, Vanessa. There we go.
All right. All right. So here's a little bit about him. I'm a very active, fun-loving boy. I am affectionate and want your attention. I've been told I'm a good at learning commands, but I don't like being left alone outside. I need your company. And let's go on to the cat of the week. This is Renee. She is a 2-year-old female. A little bit about her. I'm Renee. I'm shy, but I have a heart of gold. I love ear scratches and, sorry about that. Ear scratches and love in my kennel. I'm a little nervous, but I'm looking for a perfect home that will let me in and just get comfortable on my own terms. A little fun fact this week. Animal Service Center is returning back to the farmers market starting May 22nd. Will be our first day. And just want to say thank you guys so much and hope you all have a good day.
Thanks so much, Vanessa. Good to hear that you'll be back at the farmers market.
Yes, we're certainly excited.
Yeah, very good. Thank you so much. Next up is our jobs of the week. It's either Darlene Lopez or I think I saw Cindy on the line.
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem. This is Cindy Quillen. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
So for today, our jobs of the week, we have a construction inspector through the city of Las Cruces. This position will be closing on May the 18th of 2021. Next, we have a quality assurance food service coordinator. This is through Discovery Child Development Daycare. This position closes May 27th. There's also a mechanic position open with Pet Boys. This position closes on July 26th. And they're also seeking graduate nurses through the medic surgical department at Memorial Medical Center. Also, there is a housekeeper position available with Rehabilitation Hospital of Southern New Mexico Incorporated, and this position closes on May the 27th. We do have some upcoming events this coming week. Tomorrow, Tuesday, May 11th, there is a Calichi's Frozen Custard Recruitment Fair that starts at 11 a.m. And there's also on Friday, May the 14th, U.S. Census Bureau recruitment event, which begins at 2 p.m. For further information regarding these events and a full list of jobs, internships, and volunteer opportunities, you can visit our website at www.employnewmexico.com and at www.governmentjobs.com/careers/Las Cruces. For our local Department of Workforce Connections office, you can reach us at our phone number at 575-524-6250. We are located at 226 South Alameda Boulevard, Las Cruces, New Mexico. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful afternoon and a great week.
Thank you so much, Cindy. I know you're going to get a slew of people at your job fair with calichis there.
We are doing our
love it.
best. We're doing our
Yeah.
best.
Well,
Thank
thank
you.
you. So we'll make sure that we get that out, that calichis will be there. That's exciting. So thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome.
Yes. Next on our agenda is our COVID-19 update, and Eric Enriquez.
Okay, good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. Eric Enriquez, Assistant City Manager, to give a COVID-19 task force report. So Doña Ana County is now in the turquoise. That's great news. It'll stay in that effect for about 4 weeks, and then they'll reevaluate. Right now, our positivity rate is at 3.63. This fully vaccinated rate is 43.6%, and that was as of Friday. They hadn't posted earlier today, but it should go up, meaning that we have 74,500 residents in Doña Ana County that have been fully vaccinated. The Pan American Center event went well this week. There was over 1,900 that received their second dose of the Pfizer vaccine this past Saturday. So that will up our fully vaccinated percentage rate, and those numbers should go up as well. Things that are taking place now is the Department of Health portal is working on scheduling group events. With this ability to do group events, businesses, nonprofits, religious organizations, schools, others are able to schedule an event, and that we can try to go and administer the vaccine at their locations. These are some of the things that the Department of Health is doing in their portal to help us to register groups now. After hours and weekend vaccinations are still in the plans and starting to work. We've already extended those on Thursday evenings at the convention center, and we'll start looking at Saturdays as well. With that, radio and TV commercials are going to be aired soon to encourage vaccinations. Waiting still for the FDA approval on Pfizer for the 12 and 15 years of age. Plans have already been made with Las Cruces Public School District and the Hatch Public School District as well for vaccinating those that are 12 to 15 years of age. With the asylum refugees, still a lot of capacity and space in El Paso, that the Annunciation there with Ruben is even taking refugees from Tucson that are being flown in because of the space they have there. So the El Paso port is doing well, and there's a lot of space there with the Annunciation Center. I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Eric, for the update. Any questions? Yes, Councilor Beita-Stuvi.
Thank you. Mr. Enriquez, can we remind parents that they do need to register their kids on the app as well? And any other information that we have that could make sure that they're prepared whenever that registration or whenever the authorization comes out for Pfizer?
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem Gondeta and Councilor Stuvi, yeah, we will do that with our communications. Good point. Also, what I've seen is that there have been over 10,000 in the state of New Mexico, 12 to 15 that have already registered. So we need to continue with that push as well. Thank you for that.
Thank you. And thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Councilor Beita-Stuvi and Eric. Eric, I just have a comment. Let's see, Friday morning, I met with an individual that lives up in the East Mesa, and she was commenting about just how difficult it is being out in terms of with transportation maybe being a barrier and lack of information for the area, especially for the Spanish speakers. And I know we've done a lot around that. And I told her, look, it's on radio, TV, Telemundo. There's different avenues that we're trying to get the word out. But she indicated that it's very difficult for people to come into Las Cruces to get the vaccine, right? So what what availability might there be, particularly for our elderly and our, you know, for folks that might be disabled? What is the what might be solutions or strategies that we can impose to help people?
Oh, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Gondeta. You're absolutely correct. There is still a lull, and there still are some challenges and obstacles, especially in the rural areas. So what's taking place now are some mobile units, trying to develop some mobile units to go out, and then with the group portal that's scheduling is going to be another opportunity. But La Clinica is one of those organizations with their staff and their resources to reach out to the areas in the county that are available. La Clinica does have a mobile unit, and that's one of the things that is being put in the process, that we can all work together for those rural areas. Thank
you, Eric. So they could conceivably take their mobile unit out there, maybe at the Doniana, or excuse me, the East Mesa Department of Health. I think they have a substation out there. I don't know how, you know, if they're seeing folks there for vaccines and different things, and other programs or services that are available through Department of Health. But I'm wondering if, Eric, you can talk to them about scheduling something very specific in that area. She lives past, I think, Oñate, and maybe in that Oregon area. So anything that we can do to help bring that community forward, especially that she felt like there was a real issue getting information and people to Las Cruces, that would be really helpful. Okay, and we'll be doing that, as I mentioned, with our communications, with the radio announcements and television as well, that we can start getting some sites. As I mentioned, some of the nonprofit organizations and even religious organizations, I know there's several large churches on the east side that may be willing to host a location that we can do that and make it available even on a Saturday when it would be more available. We're also looking at seeing how we can utilize transit in some of the areas for transportation. Thank you, Eric. Really appreciate all the work that you and staff are doing, and the fire department. Thank you so much. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Okay, next on our agenda is 4.1, Introduction of Police Auditors, the OIR group. Viola Perea.
Good afternoon, everyone. Mayor Pro Tem and councilors, I'm Viola Perea with Internal Audit. And today I'd like to introduce our police auditors, the OIR group, to our City Council work session today. They have prepared a PowerPoint presentation for you, so I will turn this over to Michael Janacco and his team with the OIR group.
Thank you, Viola. Hello, Council. It's great to be with you this afternoon. And my name is Michael Janacco, and I am a principal of OIR Group. And we look forward to engaging with you and starting our project as the city's independent police monitor. What I would like to do, if I can, is just introduce the other members of our team and ask them to say just a bit about themselves and their background. And maybe we can start with Julie Rulin. Julie?
Yes, good afternoon. Thanks for having us here today. My name is Julie Rulin, and I am an attorney by training. So since about 2004, I left the practice of law and have been doing full-time monitoring and oversight of law enforcement agencies. I started out doing that work with the Police Assessment Resource Center and was fortunate to get into that because a partner at my law firm was the individual who had worked for the Los Angeles County as a special counsel and left our law practice to start the Police Assessment Resource Center. And I was able to go with him and join him in that work, and which suited me very well because litigation, I had quickly learned, and my legal practice had been doing little litigation, some criminal defense work, some civil rights work, but the the fighting with others and the posture of litigation didn't suit me. And so working in this field has been much more personally rewarding for me. And I was fortunate in 2006 to join Mike and Steve with the Office of Independent Review in Los Angeles County, where we monitored the LA County Sheriff's Department, reviewing uses of force and deputy-involved shootings, and a number of issues involving the local county jails. So that is, we've then started, and you'll hear more about it as we go through our program, working with a number of agencies outside of Los Angeles County, and have built our practice doing oversight work since then. So I will be looking forward to hearing any of your questions later, but for now, I think I'll move it on to Steve Connolly to introduce himself.
Thank you, Julie. Steve?
Thank you very much. And good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having us. As Julie said, I'm Steve Conley with OIR Group, and I actually went to law school in the Los Angeles area in the late 90s when there was a lot of focus on the LA Police Department and the whole idea of oversight and reform in the aftermath of the Rodney King case and some other kind of large scale scandals that had come to light during that time period. So I was very interested in the field from the time that I was still a law student, and was very happy to have the opportunity to begin working full time in the field of oversight of law enforcement starting in 2001. So it's hard for me to believe, but it's been 20 years now of doing this kind of work exclusively. And we, as Julie said, we've worked in a lot of different jurisdictions and with police agencies of different sizes and different contexts. There certainly are some best practices and some concepts that we think apply to all the different places that we work with. But we've also come to recognize and really find energizing all the distinctive features of each jurisdiction as well. And we know that each community has its own history and its own issues and its own background and its own relationship with the police. And we're very much looking forward to getting to know Las Cruces quite a bit better and serving the community in this new capacity. So thank you for having us, and I'm going to turn it over to Teresa Magula.
Thank you, Steve. Teresa?
Well, I'm running the PowerPoint today.
Oh,
And I am actually the only non-lawyer in our group, which I think is exceptional. But others might not agree. I have a degree in public policy with an emphasis on crime policy, and that quickly took me into the space of law enforcement oversight. I was working with the LAPD's Office of the Inspector General, reviewing complaints that citizens were making against the LAPD, as well as then focusing on specific uses of force and reviewing those cases. I was able to join OIR Group thanks to some connections with the oversight, the National Oversight Agency that we all belong to, and have been working with this team for about 5 years now. It has been a very rewarding experience because we're able to go, as Steve said, and look across the country, look across various jurisdictions to see what kind of best practices are occurring, what the kind of national dialogue is, and that has certainly been very rewarding beyond simply working with one jurisdiction. So I am grateful to be here. I am excited to start our work here in Las Cruces, and I look forward to meeting all of you. I'll turn it back over to Mike so that he can tell a little bit more about us. Thank you.
hi, Michael.
Thank you very much. So this is just a very one slide bullet on some of the work that we have done. I think in the introductions, you've already heard of it. Teresa, if you just go back to that slide for a minute. So as is indicated, we have been in this business. This isn't our first rodeo, if you will. But we have been in this business for a number of years doing this type of work. That being said, the policing of today is a new challenge. Certainly, there has been a lot of discussion about police reform and more community engagement, more oversight, particularly since the murder of George Floyd a year ago. And while we have certainly seen an uptick in interest of the kind of work that we do, we are pleased and understand that your city has been ahead of that trend and has had auditors and monitors in the past. And I think that's a testament to some foresight on your behalf that you have already been through this process to some degree. We look forward, as Teresa has indicated, Julie and Steve, to working with you. We have already started in the sense that we had a kickoff meeting with your city manager, with Viola, with your city auditor. We had a chance to meet with your chief and the lieutenant in charge of internal affairs investigations. And we also had a chance to meet with your city attorney. One of the interesting features that we think is a good feature in the scope of work that's been provided to us is that we have a chance to take a look at claims or lawsuits that come in through the other door. And we see those as just like civilian complaints, but there's a price tag attached to them. So we appreciate that we'll have an opportunity to be reviewing those cases as well. We look forward to engaging with you and sending public reports to you. Transparency is one of the things that we think is most important for any effective oversight program to have, and we appreciate that it's been built into the scope of work. We know that the city has taken some care in defining the scope of work, and we think it does provide an opportunity for robust reporting, for transparency, and for us to be able to tell the story about what is being received by the department in the way of complaints, how the department is handling them, and any suggestions on ways for improvement. One of the things we have learned in the work that we've done is that while law enforcement generally is pretty good at sharing best practices in a number of areas like disaster readiness, active shooters, and a number of other concepts, the idea of internal investigations, because of their confidentiality nature, there isn't as much sharing. So what we have found is when we learn that something has worked well in one of our other assignments, we can then take that concept and export it out to others for which we are engaged. Teresa, if you can go to the next slide. These are examples of similar size cities, although every city has their own challenges and has their own, certainly, personality and culture. These are examples of other cities in which we are performing essentially the same type of work. Every scope of work is a little different, but we have been working with these cities, for some of them for as long as a decade, but others are relatively new members of our assignment. So as I was indicating—
I may stop you there. I think
course.
Councilor Flores has a question.
Of course.
Actually, it's just a comment, Michael. We met in the mid-1990s following the Rodney King beating. And
Yes.
I was president of the Mexican American Bar Association of Los Angeles County. And remember that? Yes.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And so we met with your boss, Deval Patrick, at the time. And then we made several trips back there, and then you all came out to Los Angeles County. So, the city of Los Angeles. And we went to Harry's Bar. I don't know if you remember that part. You probably don't. But at any rate, I just wanted to laud you to really say that you did a great job as the attorney, in the Attorney General's office, the U.S. Attorney General's office, coming out to Los Angeles. And we can see some of that work now. So I'm so happy to see you here, and I'm so happy. I'm a city councilor now here in Las Cruces. I retired from the practice of law in Los Angeles and moved out here. So I just want to say a personal hello and a personal welcome and a personal just laud the work you've been doing. And we really need your help here. And I'm glad you said that we are ahead of the curve. So again, welcome, Michael. And thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me to interrupt.
Absolutely, Councilor Flores. Thank you.
And Madam Chair, may I
Okay.
respond to Councilmember Flores, please?
You can, absolutely.
It's good to get reacquainted with an old friend, Councilmember Flores, and I do remember Harry's Bar now that you've reminded me. So those were the days, right? And things were tough, and we were at that time prosecuting an LAPD officer for sort of the same conduct. We didn't even have a video though, so it was tough. But the work that you had already done, the groundwork that your association had done, was extremely helpful, and the partnership that we developed, I think, was terrific. And we look to have that same kind of relationship with you all as we get started in this new project. So thank you for taking me down memory lane.
Yes, no kidding, huh? Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you
No,
again, Madam Chair.
yeah, and then the other thing, of course, what we hope and expect to do is once this pandemic is lifted and we can actually meet with people again, we look forward to that instead of having to view you all through these little Hollywood squares. So that is going to be something that I am very much looking forward to. I am over Zoom, quite frankly, and we'll look forward to the time when we can have meetings in person. So the rest of the presentation, I think you've heard it. Teresa, you just want to go through the slides very quickly, just buzz through them. And this is only to show that every scope of work is a bit different, but they really are intended to sort of accomplish the same goals, which is to provide a level of transparency, because internal investigations and complaints have to be handled, as confidential investigations. Many cities, city communities do not have a good grasp on what's going on because they receive no information about what's going on. But you all have empowered us through our public reporting responsibility to balancing the interest in confidentiality and the privacy interests that officers should have, in our view. There is still an ability to tell the story about what it is that's being alleged about officers, what it is that officers are doing that's getting them into trouble or at least under investigation, and what it is that we can suggest as far as improving that process so that there is increased trust in policing, increased trust in accountability, and increased trust in the interest that you all as overseers of the larger cities' responsibilities have placed on us to do this work. So we look forward to continuing. As I said, we just got started. May 1 was our kickoff day, and so we look forward to coming back perhaps towards the end of the year and giving you a progress report. And unless there are any additional questions or comments, Madam Chair, I think that concludes our presentation at this point.
Thank you, Michael. Councilor Flores, Gay, Councilor Vasquez, Councilor Bencomo.
Madam Chair, I left my hand up. I have no questions.
Okay,
Thank you.
okay. Councilor Vasquez?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, and thank you to Mr. Ganico and your whole team today. I appreciate you all taking the time to be here with us and introducing yourself. We are excited to have you on board and have been without a police auditor for some time. So you're filling a much needed service for our community and our city. So thank you again. I do have just a few questions here today. Some you may not have answers to, and that's okay. Some of this may have been included in the scope of work, and so I apologize if these are repeat questions, but I just want to get them on the record. Mr. Ganico, in our previous relationship with our police auditor, the presentations to council, I would say left a little bit to be desired in terms of identifying the trends of just the types of complaints and whether they were substantiated or unsubstantiated. developing more of a narrative of what citizen complaints actually were, identifying trends. If we had, for example, a particular issue with a particular function of the police department, or in the or even particular staff or things like that. So how are you planning on reporting back, I guess, your findings from your periodic audits, and will those help to identify trends that just go beyond the data of reports and what's substantiated and what's not?
Oh, absolutely. So Councilmember Vasquez, thank you for that question and appreciate your concern that's already exhibited by your question. So yeah, we hope to have a more robust feedback loop to you all to identify trends and also to tell the story about what it is that we're seeing. I think we can tell the story without violating any confidentiality, as long as we don't name the officers, and just give you a better understanding of what it is that is being alleged by your community, what it is that's getting into the system, and then maybe as importantly, how the department is handling it. Is it a thorough investigation, and is it an objective investigation? Are there gaps in the investigation, and if so, what are they? And then finally, Councilmember Vasquez, with the idea that it's all about getting better, what are our suggestions with regard to rooms for improvement? Whether that's better guidance to officers, whether that's better investigative procedures, or whether it's more analysis with regard to outcomes. All of those areas are things that we'll be commenting on. So I hope and expect that when you see our report, you will see it to be more granular, to be more specific, and to provide you more insight, at the same time protecting confidentiality concerns that the officers and the department have. I think we can thread that needle, though, quite effectively. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Michael. If I can interject, Councilor Vasquez, I see Jennifer Vega Brown's hand up, and maybe she has additional feedback.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, Councilor Vasquez, City Council. I just want to point out in response to Councilor Vasquez's question, in the scope of work, there are a couple of very important elements in there. One of them, in review of the tort claim notices and the statistical and trend analysis, one of the things that we added was that the statistical and trend analysis and the tort review shall include, but not be limited to, offender and victim demographics, location of incidents, criminal charges associated with the incidents, disposition of cases, policy violations and dispositions, police officer demographics, and other statistics related to the complaint. So we're breaking it down so that we can follow if there are trends. That will happen with all the notices. And in addition, just to let you know, the reports will be reported within 30 days. That's included in the scope of services. There will be a semi-annual reporting, which it will have that high level of detail. And we also included that it would comply with the accountability and government ordinance. So that reporting is going to comply with that, and that would include notification to the Oversight Committee as well. So those are some level of detail that are quite different from the last auditing firm that we had. I just wanted to make sure that you were aware there's going to be a lot more detail than what you're accustomed to.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. That sounds amazing. I think that is the level of detail in terms of the demographic data from both the offender and the law enforcement side that could really help to identify trends, especially as we know, as it pertains to any type of potential racial profiling issues or other types of discrimination that may exist as a trend or could be identified for further investigation. And I think that's data that I would really like to have. But in addition, I think our residents deserve to have as well, especially in times like these today, when obviously we're having a national conversation about these types of things within different police departments. So thank you. Another question for you, Mr. Gennico, in terms of, and I think you mentioned this, but just briefly here, but in terms of reporting back to provide advice or best practices or communication with council and city management and our police department leadership, will those be offered in the form of reports in terms of perhaps the first audit that you undertake? Is that then also accompanied by a list of recommendations that you would provide to correct any measures that you see as being deficient or needing some work?
Yeah, we'll work with your department leadership, with your city attorney and your city auditor on the way in which we report back. But I think it is important to provide, first, the police leadership an opportunity to take a look at our recommendations, talk with us about them. But I also think it is important, to the degree we have recommendations, to report back and out on to what degree the department has agreed with the recommendations. That is something we generally do in all of the other assignments we have, and we would look for a way to do that here too.
Thank you, Mr. Gennico, and I appreciate that. And I think these types of recommendations, in my opinion, to the degree possible, and especially to protecting confidentiality and personnel issues, I think need to be seen by the public, because the public really needs to see that we are doing the work, that our police department is doing the work, that city management, our attorney's office, and the auditor is doing the work to create a safer community. So to whatever degree we could turn those recommendations also into public-facing opportunities for communication, I think that would just be really appreciated to think about how we structure that. And then in terms of the first audit results and report to the council, do you know, have a timeline for that yet, Mr. Gennico?
Yeah, the overarching report would be, you'll be looking for it towards the end of the year, since, as I indicated, May 1 was our operative date. And we have semi-annual reports, to the public and to you all. So, sometime around Thanksgiving, and when we're all free from this pandemic, fingers crossed, will be when we'll be expecting to report back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Gennico. And then in terms of sharing those recommendations and perhaps best practices, given that you do have experience, a long cadre of experience, especially within your team and the other clients that you have, could we assume that maybe you'll be sharing best practices from other municipalities or other departments, especially as it pertains to any complaints or specific litigation or deficiencies? Is that something you usually do?
Yeah, it is something that we do in order to sometimes in order to persuade the police leadership that others are doing this and doing it well. We often will present them with policies from other cities, or we'll ask them to talk to other departments to see how they do it. So that is something that we do quite frequently, council member.
Thank you, Mr. Gennico. I have two more questions here. One is in terms of an excessive number, or what would be considered by our standards and maybe other standards as an excessive number of complaints, or a chronic perhaps issue related to a particular individual or individuals. Again, being very sensitive about personnel issues and certainly letting our police leadership do their job, as well as our city management. I do get concerned just about missing those opportunities when we see them, in terms of if there is a problematic activity that is happening consistently amongst an officer, that we take care of that before it gets out of control. I'm not saying that happens here, but it's something to me very important to avoid, especially those costly lawsuits later. So how do you handle those types of issues in your audit reports?
No, we're handling one right now in another jurisdiction that will remain nameless, but because it's not out yet. But yeah, certainly one data point that's really important is whether or not a particular officer has an inordinate number of complaints compared to other officers that are working similar assignments or on the same shift. And in addition to ensuring that those complaints are fully and thoroughly investigated, it's also important when this happens that the police leadership consider other remedial action, and not necessarily discipline, but finding ways to remediate the situation through mentoring, through training, through other kinds of counseling or other kinds of interventions, so that we don't get into a situation in which an officer then continues along this path in an unproductive way. Regarding your overall comment about numbers of complaints and whether they should go up or go down, that's an interesting stat, because in our experience, sometimes when complaints go up, it's actually a good thing, because what we have seen is that agencies that have a history of very few complaints may have a history of very few complaints because, one, they don't take every complaint, or alternatively, their public is not confident in the system and is not confident that they will get a fair shake, and therefore they don't make complaints and just simply do not take advantage of the complaint system. Not to say that's going on in your city, but that's why that number can go up or down depending on the trust that community has in the process.
That's a great point. Thank you, Mr. Genico. And based on your initial report, as you were scrolling through some of the scope of work that you have with other municipalities or other communities, did notice some interesting services in there that we don't have, I believe, in our scope of work. And so I'd love to figure out if there are certain functions or services that you would recommend to increase transparency. And I think a model of community policing that I think the council here just really strongly supports is transparency, communication, and community policing. And so if there are things that we could be doing better, even outside of the police department, what caught my eye, I think, was you serve in an office capacity for intake. I guess you had office hours listed for one of your clients. So just wondering what innovative things we could continue to do to continue to be more transparent, communicative, and foster an environment of community policing. So would love to see that.
And what we'd like to do is take a lap around the field for a few months, but certainly those kinds of discussions we're obviously open to. One thing that we know is that policing challenges of today are going to be different than the ones of tomorrow. And so in the same way that police departments need to continue to reevaluate the way in which they provide public safety, our services continually need to be reevaluated in the way we provide oversight. So we're open to any of that and look forward to those future discussions, Council Member.
Thank you so much. I'll just say I think you'll enjoy working with our new police chief. He has been here for quite some time on the force and is a resident and local community member. And I have full faith he'll work with you fully to make sure that this is a productive service that we offer to our community and to the police department, and as well as working with our wonderful new city manager. So welcome again, Mr. Genico, to you and your team. Thank you, and thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Councilor Vasquez. Councilor Bencomo.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you so much, everyone. It's really nice to meet you. We're happy to have you all here. And Mr. Genico, am I saying that right? Please correct me if I'm saying your last name wrong.
Well, it's Giannaco, but that's not too bad. Giannaco is actually the way to say it.
Thank you. I have to ask. People pronounce my name wrong all the time, so I like to give you that courtesy. Mr. Giannaco, thank you. Yes, I have some more specific questions and then some more general questions for you. But I'm really glad to have you all here today. I mean, just given the heaviness of policing conversations in the last year, really probably for a long time, but especially in the last year, Las Cruces has certainly not been immune to that reality. And so, we're very glad that you're here, and we're excited about what you'll be able to provide for us as a city. I'm curious about, can you walk us through the process of between now and the next time we see you? What does that look like? I heard you say that you've already began having those conversations with the city manager and city attorney and our new police chief. So those are some of the first things. What kind of information did you ask for, right? Like what happens in this next month and then 2 months, sort of that process?
Oh, absolutely. So, as guided through the scope of work. So ordinarily, what we do is we receive cases after they've been completed, and then we evaluate them and provide an annual or semi-annual report on what we're finding. And that means we're looking at the strength of the investigation. We're looking at whether the decision was based on evidence and was principled, and whether the investigation was thorough, and then reporting back, in a public report. This scope of work was a little different, and I think your city attorney commented on it, and I think this is new. But instead of waiting for that 6-month period to send it all back to the department for review, this scope of work actually has us receive investigations as they're completed and then return them within 30 days to the department. And the advantage of that process is it gives feedback in a more timely way to the department rather than the end of a several month period. And we're then able to have some conversation if needed on explaining our views. And so to the degree that this is about improvement and feedback, as you know, the best way to improve conduct or behavior is through immediate feedback. And so this is going to be more immediate, and I think that will improve the process. When all is said and done, as your city attorney indicated in reading off the scope of work, there will be a robust report that will then be presented to you all, and an opportunity for feedback and further guidance.
Great. Thank you for just laying that out for me once more. What kind of work do you do with, I was reading through your website, and I know that you listed on there engaging with community, and I'm curious if that is something that you'll be doing as part of our contract, and what does that look like?
Yeah, it's a good question. We, as I said, every city is different, and some of the cities have review boards or police commissions, et cetera, that have been set up. And so in those cases, we work with the commission and review board to have sort of a public facing piece to our work. And then there are others that don't, like have that out-facing report, like Palo Alto does not. So in that case, we report directly to council as opposed to a commission or a review board. Certainly, we are available. Should any member of the community want to be interested in the process, we can talk about the process. We certainly aren't hiding from them with regard to providing information about what our responsibilities are, and we'll be able to do that as well. So we have that opportunity, and people who want to talk with us about the process or their own individual complaints, while we're not supposed to really be intake, we don't do our investigations, we can facilitate some knowledge and information for those who may not feel as safe talking to your police department. They can certainly call us, and we can have a conversation about that.
That's good to know that we do not have some sort of citizen oversight committee specifically as it relates to the police department. And so to me, that feels really important. And I feel really, really strongly about transformation and change happening in very public way and not just behind closed doors. And so to have that line of communication open with community, particularly those that are directly impacted, feels really important to me for sure. Gazel Vasquez asked a lot of my questions as well, so let me just get through my list here. I think honestly my last question for now is I'm just curious in terms of the OIR's group sort of general philosophy about your work and how the last year has changed that, if at all. If it has, I'm curious how you all are approaching what you do now in the light of what's happened in the last year, especially with calls from a lot of community members around, really rethinking public safety and what that looks like. And that's something that I've been trying to push that conversation here on council. And so I'm curious to hear from you all, your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. The year has been quite a year in so many different ways. It kind of started when the pandemic hit and shut us down. So we've had to learn to try to continue to engage with the various cities that we work with in different ways, right? And so I'm sure you all have had that same challenge. It's some ways more efficient to have Zoom calls, but not as effective in my view. But that's one. And then at the end of May, when George Floyd was murdered, our work has changed in several ways. One is there are many, many cities that have had no monitoring, have had no kind of oversight whatsoever, who now recognize the interest and the need in doing so. So we're helping various cities try to craft some kind of monitoring program or auditing program, in some ways similar to what you already have. The broader discussion and national narrative about reinventing, reimagining policing is certainly something that we are engaged in and have been talking in various cities and counties about as part of our work and as part of our conversations that we've been asked to facilitate. In fact, we have facilitated a number of conversations, for communities and for cities in that regard. And we think that, it shows, one, the importance in having more engagement. And also it has challenged us in different ways to rethink, what public safety should look like. Are there better ways to perform that service? Can other social service support be part of that solution? Does the cop need to be the one showing up with regard to all houseless issues, or can that be supplanted through other mechanisms? What about mental health calls? So there's a lot going on. With regard to your question, council member, about philosophy, we do not throw nuclear bombs. We try to be collaborative in all that we do with whoever we engage with. And that's been our philosophy. We have found that we are more effective if we have developed a collaborative relationship, so long as we can continue to get the confidential information we need, the full access we need, and the ability to be heard, and finally the ability to tell various publics what we are finding. So with those essential qualities, we do intend to be collaborative. That's the way we roll.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And that was a great answer. I thank you very much for that. And thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Councillor Bencomo. Next up is Councillor Sorg.
I didn't think I was next. I thought Beta Stubbe was. But anyway, let me begin by saying thank you all. Thank you for all the information, the presentation, and introduction to this service for the city of Las Cruces. I would like to start out by saying, where is the scope of scope of work for this contract? I have been looking through all my documents. I cannot find it anywhere. Did I miss it somehow? Who sent it to us and so on? Where is it, period? This is for staff, of course.
I saw Jennifer Vega Brown.
Mayor Pro Tem, Mayor Pro Tem and Councillor Sword. The original scope of service was contained in when you approved the contract. It was an attachment when you approved the contract, and we can resend that to you. Okay, yeah, the packet today did not have anything with it, so I was looking for something along those lines. Okay, thank you for sending that. I would like to ask Mr. Janeco if you say we're kind of ahead of the curve, what do you mean by that?
Can you give me examples?
Sure, council member. There are 15,000 police departments in this country, more or less. That's a lot, right?
Yeah.
And of those 15,000, I think 14,500 have no monitoring and have never had any monitoring with regard to the way in which the police perform internal investigations and handle complaints. And so what I meant was you're one of the 500 that have had some level of monitoring. And I know that there has been an interest, as Councilmember Vasquez said, in improving that process and making it more robust. And I think this scope of work, as explained by your city attorney, is intended to do that. But my only point in saying that was that you are not coming from zero. There has been some work in the past. And so at least your department has had some history of working with an outside group in the past few years. And most departments, most cities do not have anything, and they still do not have anything.
I see. But as far as our practices go, it doesn't include practices that the city police department is doing compared to other police departments across the country. How do we compare there, or does it at all?
Since we've only gotten started for 9 days, I really can't answer that question.
Okay.
But I think I'll be able to answer that question better at the end of the year when we have our first report.
Okay, understood. Yeah. One last question though. Can a citizen of Las Cruces file or give you a complaint directly without having to go through the police department itself?
I think that we can do that as long as the complainant understands that the investigative machinery is still going to be performed by the department. And we can make that clear and have made that clear in other jurisdictions. What it does do is it allows us to have our antennas up that a complaint is coming in if in fact there's an outreach to us. So I think in the same way that your department is progressive in this sense, and that it accepts all complaints no matter how they come in, which is a good thing. Whether it comes in through us, I think that's viable and doable.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Sorg. Councillor
Yes.
Benavidez.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, and thank you all for being here today, and for my counselors for giving such great questions. So I only have about 3 left. I do want to take a moment to thank members of our Oversight Committee for being here today. We have Chair Judge Ryan and former Counselor Mr. Ekman here. No, there's one more, but I don't think the other member is on, but I do want to take a moment to thank you for joining us, since you will be part of these processes. And Mr. Janetko, how far, may you please explain, how far back will your scope of work include again, just for my notes?
Sure, and I know there has been a gap in service, and if the city wants us to look at some of those cases that were completed during that gap, we can do that. But what we told the chief in our meeting last week, I think it was last week, or maybe the week before, that we would start May 1, and that anything that is closed out after May 1 is supposed to be sent to us for a review and then a 30-day turnaround.
Okay. And with any of the documents that you end up requesting, I know that there is usually a time span that you ask for those in. If those documents are not given to you within that requested time frame, who do you report to let them know?
Yeah, we'll our first stop is with the department, right? And so we'll talk with the chief and see what it is that's not there. And I assume, and usually, in fact, of the 6 other clients that I provided to you on our slide, we've never had an issue with regard to that. If we need to have further relief or further explication, we can obviously work through your city auditor or your city manager in order to get the information we need. But I don't expect that's going to be an issue, having had a chance to talk with your chief already.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Counselor Abeita-Stuvi, Jennifer Vega Brown has her hand up. I imagine she has some additional information.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and Councilor Abeita-Stuvi. Just to reassure you, in the accountability and government ordinance, our city auditor has subpoena power. And so if it ever escalated to that, which I cannot foresee that it would, they could work with our city auditor and get any of those documents that they need.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. And last question with that, looking at most of the scope of work that you do is with current issues. Obviously, I think everybody performs at their peak level when they know that they're being reviewed. How does your agency kind of gather the history of problems in the past versus the stuff that you are presented?
That's a good question. The historical context is certainly something we have already researched a bit. And you're probably not going to be surprised that individuals who have felt that there have been some issues in the past have already reached out to us. So we're getting their historical perspective, and we certainly have the ability and will, take a look at media reports and some of the, controversial times in the past in order to prepare us for this assignment. We've already done some of that work, but we'll continue to be doing that as we move forward.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Those are all my questions.
Thank you, Councilor Abeita-Stuvi. I see Mayor Miyagishima is on. I'll give it to him. Everybody has asked questions, Mayor, with the exception of me, and I'd like to go next if I may.
We're still on number one?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Michael and company. Really appreciate you being here today and hearing your philosophy and sort of the other entities that you're working with. I am excited that you're here. I think it's something that really needs to happen, and I'd like to advocate for that gap year and a half, maybe 2 years, that some reports be sent to you, if not all, to really get an idea of where we're at. I'm no stranger to having reviews, auditors in my previous position, so I understand what I'm asking is a huge lift, but I think it important that we do that to get going on it, if you will, because you're May 1st and right, you'll be receiving those cases as they're completed, so that there's at least 30 to 45 days that you won't, right? There's going to be cases that our local law enforcement officers will be handling and trying to complete. So I would say that you could, hit the ground running by reviewing those past cases. How difficult would that be, Michael and Jennifer, to add that to the scope of work?
Councilor Gandara and Mayor, we would have to adjust the scope of work and probably add an amendment to the contract, which would have to be agreeable with OIR. It's not impossible. It can be done. I think once we look at what the caseload, if you will, caseload is, that could be better determined.
Okay, thank you for that, Jennifer. Yeah, I agree with my colleagues. We're a real proponent. We support community policing. I think we'd like to work collaboratively with our law enforcement officers. We had a sort of community mitigations team that met. Councilor Vasquez, Mayor Miyagishima, and I would meet with our chief, deputy chiefs, and discuss any issues that, because we were seeing so much that was happening related to COVID, our property crime up, our domestic, our violent crimes have increased. And so it was a way to discuss those issues and come up with strategies and solutions moving forward. We haven't met in about a month because we have a police, I think we're calling it Oversight Committee. I don't recall the terminology, but
public safety. Public safety. We're gonna transition to a public safety PRC basically.
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor, for that. I see Jennifer has her mic unmuted. I don't know if you want to say something, Jennifer.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and Mayor Miyashima. It is a select committee.
There you go. I was looking for that word. Yes. Public Safety Select Committee. I found it helpful, Michael, to have those conversations. I think we're having them twice a month, but frankly, a bit frustrated. I always feel that there's maybe a lack of trust, or why are we here? I certainly don't want to waste time. And so I don't want to waste Chief's time, and they're busy. They're kind, they're generous with their time, thoughtful, but I often have felt like there have been times where we're sort of dragging people along, and I don't want to feel that way. And frankly, that's how I'm feeling. And I think the way I feel is very parallel to what our community is feeling in terms of sort of this reimagining police, public safety, if you will. So how do you work from that, standpoint when, maybe there's an attitude that we're not all in this together, and we really want to, help our community, but also help our police be successful, frankly.
No, Mayor Pro Tem, those are all great questions. And there's no perfect solution, but a couple things. One is that,
Excuse me, sir. I'm sorry for just jumping in like this, and I don't know how Mayor Pro Tem is doing this, but we just need you to state your name every time you talk so that the transcriber can, because they don't really watch the video and they just know who. You can just say Michael
Janako. Thank you for that order of protocol, Mayor.
Yes,
Michael Janako here. How's that?
That's perfect. I'm also glad that I got your name right off the bat. Too.
Mayor Pro Tem, your question, I would answer it two ways. One is that our discussions with the department will be a little different than sort of the philosophical discussions about reinvention, et cetera. At least they will initially, because we'll be talking about actual cases. Mm-hmm. We'll be talking about actual complaints. We'll be talking about, actual investigations. And so to the degree we have suggestions, feedback, or questions, or recommendations relating to them, they'll be more tangible. With regard to the bigger issue, I think that can get frustrating, in the sense that people seem to, on so many issues in this country these days, seem to have sort of gone to their corners, and even to the point where they're not even interested in hearing the other perspective. And so one of the things we try to do is provide that kind of opportunity to have discussions that seem to make more sense. And instead of, all or nothing, defunding or nothing, there's some common ground in which we can redefine public safety, and we try to have those discussions. And when we, I think, frame the question that way, I think we end up with a more productive conversation and some actual results that we are seeing in other cities.
I appreciate that. I really do. I just want this to be a meaningful, productive experience for everybody involved. And I know that we have police officers are doing their best under the circumstances, and it's been a difficult time for them as well. So I want to make sure that they are trusting, engaging, and relationship building with you in order to get the best, right, situation. Michael, I noticed that in the scope, or as Jennifer was reading off the scope of work, the deliverables, you will be looking at past litigation. When you do that, is that going to be reading through? Well, I guess let me ask you, what is the process? What will you be doing with those, and then how will you be reporting back, and to whom?
We'll be reporting back with regard to that review to you all. At the same time, we'll be reporting back to the more traditional complaints. But with regard to tort claims or lawsuits, so obviously there is the liability issue, and then there's the potential payout, the damages, and all of that. And it sometimes, depending on what's happening, sometimes you're asked to weigh in as public elected officials on, settling and things like that. But apart from dealing with a lawsuit, and you've got, lawyers that are going to be doing that, in our view, when a lawsuit comes in, it's sort of a wake-up call, or should be a wake-up call, that somebody is aggrieved enough to find a lawyer and then file a lawsuit, which is, quite a lot, as opposed to someone showing up at the desk of the department and filling out a complaint form. There's a lot more process and a lot more work and a lot more motivation behind the lawsuit. So with that being said, in addition to dealing with the defense of the lawsuit, in our view, there ought to be a separate track to investigate the allegations for a couple reasons. One is it puts your lawyers in a better position to figure out, did we do anything wrong here? Were there any issues here? What is it that motivated the complainant to file the lawsuit? And also, it allows the department to evaluate the complaint independent of the legal stream to see whether or not there is some need for accountability. There is a need for further direction or guidance to officers through policy improvement, or there's a need to train officers better. And all of those questions, if they're not looked at through the litigation cycle, are forfeited, and the department doesn't benefit from the filing of the lawsuit or the claim. And what this is intended to do is ensure that there is an opportunity for a learning experience so that it will reduce the likelihood of further claims and lawsuits coming in, which is important, but maybe more importantly, that there isn't reoffending, there isn't re-aggravation by officers who either are unknowing of what the law is, need further training, need further guidance, or some accountability.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Mayor. Those are all my questions for now.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Jennifer, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Mayor. And just to follow up, Mayor Pro Tem, the scope of services is going to be a little bit different when we're dealing with tort claims and tort claim notices, because the matters that are going to be reviewed, it's specific to matters that have been litigated or disposed and are no longer pending. So there is going to be a time delay, just because we can't talk about ongoing litigation. There will be a time delay. I think it was important for us to put this because it's hard to circle back. As you know, sometimes litigation lasts a couple of years, and it's still important to circle back even when it lasts that period of time, because we still need to make sure that we're addressing the issue that came up to begin with, if there was an issue. And so it's better than not reviewing it at all, but there could be some lag in that information being provided to OIR.
Sure, I understand that, and I'm completely fine with that. I just wanted to know what their process was, so thank you.
I think former Councilor Jack Ekman would like to ask a question. Is that right, Councilor?
It is correct, Mr. Mayor, and I thank you so much. And it's good to see all my friends here today. This is wonderful, even by Zoom. Mr. Janako, a great presentation. I thoroughly understand, I believe, your methodology and the process that you're using. And much like the Oversight Committee, very reliant on what has already happened and what has already transpired. I wonder, in your visit with your other clients, do you have clients that utilize a real-time dashboard on what may or may not be imminent problems as they happen? Has anything like that been developed at this time in the practice of public safety?
You know, that's a great question, Counselor. And what I would say is that departments are getting better at sort of keeping track of things in real time, but there's a long way to go. There are some programs that if carefully maintained and populated can give the leadership of any organization, of any police agency, that information. But what we've seen more often is, unfortunately, that information isn't as easily accessible to leadership as it should be. As we move forward through this project, that's something that we will be looking at with regard to your city.
Thank you so much. We on the Oversight Committee serve at the pleasure of the City Council as a select committee. And we're doing that as we can to help them very much in their roles. They're very busy people doing everything. And then we can have just a very small view of what is happening. In my ride-alongs with police officers in the city, those have been very educational to me. And to give you a little orientation, on those occasions, 90% of the calls are behavioral health related in our city. We lack behavioral health services to a great degree, and it affects everything of city life, our economy, our culture, everything is affected by that. And so in seeing the very difficult job of our police officers, I'm concerned about them at this time. Have you ever worked your process alongside a professional assessment of how they believe they are professionally satisfied in their positions?
Yes. Again, we have taken a look at police culture and officer satisfaction and morale and well-being and wellness issues. You know, for example, we are talking tomorrow with Santa Monica City Council on the police response to protest activity last year. And one of the things that is featured in that report is our concern about the wellness issue of officers who felt overwhelmed by the events of last summer and perhaps not enough attention being placed on it by the city. So those are issues that we certainly are aware of. And to your point about individuals with mental health crisis being a large part of the police officer's responsibility, it is because, unfortunately, in my view, we haven't spent enough time relying on other social science, social worker infrastructure to assist the police in performing that responsibility.
That was Michael Giannacco speaking.
Oh, yes, it was Michael Giannacco, Mayor. I'm going to have to get used to this.
That's okay. No problem. No problem.
And Mr. Mayor, I thank you for this opportunity. Our chair of the Oversight Committee is also here. I'm curious to know if he might have a question. Judge Kieran Ryan. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Judge, you're muted. You're still muted. And you're still muted. I can't unmute you, I don't think. Nice. We can't hear you, Judge.
Mayor, the host of the...
There we go. Can you hear me?
There you go.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry about that. Thank you. It's Kieran Ryan, the chairman of the Committee for Oversight. And my question would be to Mr. Giannacco, is that our cities that have oversight committees, does that help to incorporate the Oversight Committee as well into the process of your investigation going forward?
Judge, if I may, do you mean a Citizens Oversight Committee, or do you mean a committee such as the OIR group?
I mean, the Citizens Oversight Committee, I mean, is that, does getting their input into the, anything that they've observed by way of oversight, does that help in their investigations?
Judge Ryan, this is Michael Janako responding.
Yes.
How'd I do, Mayor?
Perfect.
Yeah. The answer to your question is for those that have those kinds of commissions and review boards, what we end up doing is we will be reporting to them on what we're finding. So we provide, that insight that we're learning, but because they are representative of the community or the city, and we don't live there, we end up gaining their insight and perspective. So we find that to be helpful. In the same way that I think when we report to you all in a different way, that your feedback as representatives and residents of the city will be extremely helpful to our work. And we find that to be a very symbiotic relationship.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Janako. I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
Before I get to Councilor Bencomo and Mayor Pro Tem, what's interesting, ladies and gentlemen of OIR group, is so the first time we ever used an outside auditor was PERF. That was in 2008, 2009. And they had both academic experience, but also police experience. But just looking through your backgrounds of almost every one of you here, you do have that experience, but not necessarily from the police department, but more from the litigation side. So I think that's going to be good, so that you can make sure that see some of the various policies that have arisen that might be able to prevent us from that happening again. But one of the things that I guess, and it's fair, and I know you see this around the country. I know I see you have several clients. Right now it's difficult. It's got to be extremely difficult to be a police officer. I know just one of my cousins, two of them, just in the last 3 months are retired. This is a difficult job right now, and the public expects a lot of them. And I think what happens is what's being highlighted. I mean, there's some bad characters out there, really bad, and some that deserve to go to jail. But the majority of police officers. And I may be biased, that I like to think of them as my children. They don't mess up. It's yours that mess up. But it's a difficult task here, and I'm glad that we're slowly having this discussion, because we expect police officers to know how to deal with the homeless, to know how to deal with the mental health, know how to deal with other social problems that we're slowly trying to get some remedies to help them. And so I think what you bring to the table is, we have a very well-run department, and it's good to be able just to have those checks and balances, not only what our current rules or regulations are, but then what suggestions that you've seen from best practices from around the country, and be able to hopefully incorporate that. And I think, but again, I want to say, based on what I read, you all are about as close as a professional citizens oversight board that you could get. So, I think that's good. And I know that one time Councilor Bencomo and I were on a I wouldn't say a talk show, but a show. And there's a lot of things to really be a true citizens oversight. You have to have a lot of legal powers to subpoena people to do these things that, we just don't have. And so that's why I think you all are going to play a crucial role in helping the public know that, you've got professionals here that have worked both from the U.S. Attorney side to the mayor's side there in Los Angeles. It seems like you worked a lot with LAPD, which has 10,000 officers there. I mean, that's an incredible amount of experience you can bring. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm sorry I was late, but I'm interested to see how things continue to roll, and thank you for being here. So we've got Councilor Bencomo, Mayor Pro Tem, and then Councilor Sparks. Councilor Bencomo.
Thanks, Mayor. Yes, thank you. Just one more question that I thought of as Mr. Aikman was talking about mental health, and even including in and especially for police officers, which is huge. I think that's a really big conversation to be having with our firefighters. Definitely, right? There's really high rates of suicide, which is just heartbreaking, but definitely mental health within police departments. And we had this conversation a while ago in a work session, and that was one of the things that popped up as well. We'd have to take that back to the police union. And I'm curious what kind of work you do with how you navigate the relationship with the police unions as well.
Yeah, thank you for the question. We understand that the association, Michael Giannacco responding to the counselor's question. So we recognize the association or the union has an important role to play in representing the interests of their membership. And because of that importance, we do reach out to the union and association for a couple reasons. One, to get their perspective and insight, but also to make sure that if they have any questions or concerns about our role, we are certainly able to respond to those kinds of questions and give them a better understanding of how we perform our responsibilities.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Mayor Pro Tem?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I don't know how, in terms of a time frame, how long ago this is done, but the city police department has undergone peak performance, and they have priorities and certain metrics that they'd like to meet. I wasn't sure if you had seen anything like that. And then as a result of this peak performance and deliverable setting, they've done a survey that probably now is 2 years old. I think Chief Dominguez is on the line, and he could probably say how long ago that survey was. But I'm bringing these up because I think these are really important aspects that you that I'd like for you to look at as part of your analysis, if you will, moving forward. Are those documents, have they been shared with you, Michael?
Mayor, this is Michael Giannacco responding. The documents I'm not familiar with, but I'm sure that the chief would provide them. And I think for purposes of context, it would be helpful to see. Absolutely.
That's great. That's great. So late January, and my last question and comment really is, in late January, I did a public safety meeting for my district, but very specific to an area that was seeing an increase in crime, and more specifically from chief's perspective, just not in an area that that I think is limited in terms of relationship, right, with law enforcement. And so we had that. We had very few people attend. It was via Zoom. I just want to say I'm going to have another meeting at the Mesquite Historic area at the end of the month as well. But I'll be having some of these meetings and really posing, some questions about attitudes and reimagining police and sort of what we will do moving forward in relation to just building relationship with law enforcement. Do you have experience with other counselors or councils that might do that in tandem with what you're doing now, and that is having, you're in your initial phases of assessment and relationship building. But I guess I'm wanting to hear from you, how I might coordinate, to really build what we're trying to do here, and that is, just gaining, a better system in place for our law enforcement. So I guess I'm saying that out loud because I want people to know that that's what I'm going to be up to, and want you to be aware of that as well. But if you have any suggestions in terms of sort of questions that I might pose to the public related to that, I'm happy, to take that.
This is Michael Giannacco responding to the Mayor Pro Tem's question. I would be happy to hear, what you are planning, and one of the asks that we would have is that if there is a way in which you are collecting feedback, whether that information could be fed back to us, I think would be contextually very helpful to have.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you, Mayor.
Before I get to Councilor Sorg, Michael, you have to have the best response that I've heard in a long time from our guests that speak. So thank you. Councilor Sorg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Giannacco, for all your answers. The council has asked many fine questions and made many fine things said. I just tried to fill in a few blanks that I find in this whole auditing process. And one of them is, you mentioned that people in the community can connect or can make complaints directly to you. So I need to know how they do it. Is an email address, a phone call, or what?
This is Michael Giannacco responding to Councilmember Sorg. Councilmember, yeah, they can reach out to us all kinds of ways after our call. I will work perhaps with your city auditor to make sure that you all have that information. But we'll find ways to make that information available to your city residents. Okay,
Thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you again with good news too. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yep, thank you. Okay, well, again, thank you again for your presentation. I'm sorry I wasn't able to hear it all, but I'll watch it on the rerun or on the video. I'll check it out. And good to have you on board. Like I said, you come with tremendous, extensive experience. So we're hoping that our investment in your firm is going to reap 10 times that in other benefits to the city. So thank you for that, and thank you for all that you all going to provide.
Thank you, Mayor. This is Michael Giannacco on behalf of OAR Group responding to your nice comments. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. Okay, well, thanks again. We'll talk another time, probably in 6 months or so. So enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Michael.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye-bye.
You too.
Okay, so next we're going to go to the Geobond projects, the overall update. And I'm going to presume David Cedillo is going to kind of start this off.
Yes, good afternoon, Mayor. You're correct. I will be starting the presentation. For council. Can everyone see the presentation at this time?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, good afternoon. My name is David Cedillo, the Public Works Director, and I'll be going over your Geobond program update this afternoon. So just a little bit of background, as council is aware, the GO bonds were approved by voters back in August of 2018 for $35.6 million. It included 4 questions. As part of those, question number 1 had multiple areas that were within that question, those being park improvements, dog parks, sports fields, the Hadley Avenue Reconstruction Complex, Unidath Playground and Splash Pad. We also had sports courts and park rehabilitation, as mentioned before, the dog parks and the East Mesa Public Rec Complex. In question 2, we had the Animal Service Center for $9.8 million. Fire station number 3, as part of question number 3, that one was for $6.2 million. And question 4, which had the walking, jogging, and biking trail improvements at 2.7. Again, all of these projects are to be completed and will be completed by the end of calendar year 2020. Now with that, we'll go into the updates that we have. For question number 1, we have approximately completed 89% of the project. The estimated completion date is October 8th. We do have part of those projects here listed that we've completed. Mag Ball Field, for example, has been completed and now is open for use. We have Jim Hardy Ball Field. We had the punch list walkthrough last week on the 6th. We're estimating that completion be done by the 15th of this month. Also, as part of the Hadley Recreational Complex, we have Paws Ball Field. The contractor at this point is still doing the replacements of the light fixtures. The lights are up. They're working on the wiring for those. At this point in time, the contractor has completed the door restoration, and we have received past inspections from our Construction Industries Division for the structural portion up on the decking for Paws Park. We also have windows and louvers that have been installed, and we're at about 30% complete on installing the siding along the crow's nest up at the top. Along with that, we also have Rangaya T-ball fields. The lighting there will be completed once the contractor has completed the improvements at Paws. Also at Rangaya Ball Field, they have completed the irrigation improvements on those fields. Here, you'll be able to see the construction schedule from the contractor that they've submitted. And as you can see, we have some of those items listed as being complete and those that still remain on some of these portions that we have there. As noted, you can see the completion of the irrigation at Rangaya. We also have MAG that has been completed and the percentages for those other parks at this time. Here in this graph here, we have two graphs. The one on the left, the cylinder graph that you're seeing, are those billings that the contractor has submitted to the city for payment based on time, or the contract time allowed for the contractor. As you can see, we're well ahead in billing as opposed to contract time. The graph on the right, you will see the red actually represents the amount of actual completion on the project as opposed to the estimated planned completion that was provided before construction began. As you can see, we're well ahead of that with the amount. That is due to the cost of the lighting itself. So as we get closer to completion, you will see that flatten out. We also have here the other portion of question number 1, which we have for sports and parks. We are approximately 52% complete. An estimated completion date of the end of this calendar year, December 31st. We do have completion of the Desert Trails Community Park, and we're also at this point in time working on Apodaca Park, which includes the pickleball court. And at this time, they're working on the perimeter fence. They have installed the concrete expansion, and they've also installed the court lighting. Contractors also working on the shade structure, which is adjacent to the pickleball court at the playground. And lastly, the surfacing for the court itself is scheduled to begin by the end of May. Also, as part of the parks and sports courts, we have Benavidez Center. This is the replacement of the basketball court, which you can see in your upper left-hand picture of the grid. At this point in time, the contractor has demolished and installed a new one, as you can see in the photo. They've also done the work there with the joints and installed the basketball goals and included the striping. This one is almost nearing completion, and once it is accepted, we will be opening that up to the public. Next, we also have Young Park. We do have footing and slab completion that has happened as part of that project on a 20 by 60, 16 by 16, and 12 by 12 shade structure foundations. You can see one up there at the top right-hand corner, illustrating the footings, and the slab has been placed on there as well. And then over at Young Park as well, we do have the improvements to the tennis courts. At this point in time, the contractor has removed the old surface. They've repaired the cracks, And as you can tell here in the bottom left photo, they have already started that finish on the court. Here again is the schedule for the parks and sports courts by the contractor. As noted in a previous update, Lions Park is 100% complete. Desert Trails now has reached 100% since that update. And we also have the percentages as some of these others move along. As you can see, we're nearly complete with Benavidez Center at this time. Here again, you'll have those same graphs as we did for the previous project. Here again on the left, you will see the billing from the contractor as opposed to the contract time. That is ahead of schedule, as you can see. The graph on the right, however, is those percentage or those improvements completed with the estimated line of completion before construction. We are a little bit low, but as we get some of these projects completed, those lines will parallel and start to meet up here fairly soon. Excuse me. Next, we have Unidath Park. The construction drawings have been submitted to the Construction Industries Division and New Mexico Environment Department for review and then move forward to permitting. At this point in time, the city is ready to select a date for the request for proposals as that draft is ready for that review. Also, as part of question 1, we have the East Mesa Public Rec Complex. Here in phase 1, we do have the request for proposals that was advertised last Friday. We do have a scheduled pre-bid conference scheduled for May 20th, and then bid opening scheduled for June 8th on this project. Next, we have the dog parks also as part of question 1. As council is aware, these two projects are being incorporated with the construction of the Animal Services Center in Mesilla Valley. That contract was approved by council on April 19th, and the notice to proceed will be issued to the contractor this week. Staff did have a pre-construction site visit with El Paso Electric last week, as there will be some relocation of overhead lines as part of this project. Next, here we have question 2, which is the Animal Services Center. And this update, it mirrors exactly what we just saw on the previous slide with the dates and those items that are occurring at this time. For fire station number 3, the replacement. The project is approximately 25% complete. There is the completion date of January 20th, 2022. At this point in time, the foundation construction is approximately 95%, along with the floor slab of about 75%. I do want to note that we did receive the structural steel. That was one of the items that had a long lead time, and we were able to get those materials in, which is great because now, since they've been delivered, they started the erection of the building itself. And here are a few photos of the site itself as we've gone through. As you can tell in the photos down in the bottom, you can see the erection of that structural steel for the building as we go on. We also have photos of the foundation as it was being placed during the construction of the building. Here we have the project schedule for the fire station. And I did mention to everyone that the completion date for the contract is January 20th of 2022. However, the contractor has submitted a construction schedule, and they're proposing, based on if everything goes as planned, they should be completing the project somewhere around late October, possibly early November. Again, we have the same graphs here on both money and time and also percentage complete. We are a little low on the billing for the time, but as we move along and more work continues, we will start to see that gain and possibly surpass. Again, with those percentages complete on the graph there, you see we are below that. However, the contractor has estimated that they should have a shorter time frame for construction, and we should be meeting up with that line relatively soon. Next, we have the walking and jogging trails. That project started April 12th. We have an estimated finish date of April 27th, 2022. For the Mesilla Drain, Elephant Butte Irrigation District approved the 100% construction plans, and the contractor has started on that portion of the trail. At this point in time, we are working with El Paso Elephant Butte Irrigation District as they required some modifications to the construction drawings. The consultant is working on those, and we'll be submitting those shortly for review again by EBID. And here we have all the program schedules side by side on top. If council recalls, the top portion is that was outlined by the program. The line below dictates and shows the actual time frame that has taken on each individual project of the Geobond. Again, I would like to note that all of these projects will be completed before December 2022. Next, here we have the program budget. This outlines those budgets allocated to each program. Now, as mentioned before, question 1 does have various sites. So that does include East Mesa, Unidad, East Hadley Rec Complex, Park and Sports Courts, and the dog parks. All of those are under question number 1. Lastly, here we have the overall progress of the Geobond projects. As you've noted in the graphs before, again, this is estimating the planned completion to the actual. As you can tell, we had some projects that were exceeding their estimated times, and we had some that were a little low. On average, we're right on track right there with the Geobonds as a whole and as a program. With that, I do have staff available. If council has any questions, it would be happy to answer those for you.
Thanks, David. That was really good. A lot of good information, a lot of good timetables. And I'm sure, and I know Mayor Pro Tem mentioned this once upon a time when she was responding to somebody, but I'm sure you all have seen and heard about the skyrocketing costs of steel, lumber, contractors. I mean, it's just very difficult. One of them here, just the article that came out a couple weeks ago, prices 20% higher, and it's just there's just so much downtime because there's not even drivers to move the material. So, in light of everything, I think we're doing good. Of course, you know, there's always going to be someone who wants it done yesterday, but it's, you know, we're considering what we've just gone through this last 12, 15 months. I have to commend your team, David, for a job well done.
Thank you, Mayor.
Councilor Bencomo, Councilor Betastuvi.
Yes, I absolutely agree with you, Mayor. Thank you so much, David Cedillo. I think honestly, all of these things are just incredibly exciting. And the fact that some of them are this far along already is great. I drove off Valley yesterday and I saw the structure for the firehouse going up already. I feel like we were just there yesterday digging up dirt. So that's pretty incredible. I just have one question, David. I'm curious if you could address, at last week's council meeting, there was a big concern posed by the folks from the dog parks regarding some of the perceived changes. Could you address those here in this public setting for folks listening in terms of, I've been getting some emails too with folks concerned that the new contract eliminated lighting and drinking water facilities and a restroom, which I didn't recall, but I want to make sure that people understand sort of moving forward with the project, why some things may change, the timeliness of it, why we don't want to go over the time and money allocated to us, right? Can you just address some of those concerns for folks?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Councilor Bencomo, Mayor David Cedillo, Public Works Director. And there was quite a few that were brought up. I will address some of them that you have mentioned here. So some of the lighting that we have for the parks that they were talking about, the dog parks are actually designated as dawn to dusk parks. As such, lighting will not be installed as part of those projects. There was also a question about the elimination of a restroom at the Rinconada site. Now, that was eliminated through value engineering with the costs that were received. However, the city is looking into possible funding sources to be able to place that back into these projects. So we are, although right now they are eliminated, we are looking at ways to incorporating those back into the project.
Great. So David, oh, sorry, I thought you were.
No, and just lastly, there was a letter submitted to the city with several questions. We did provide answers to those questions, and that has gone back out to the resident that submitted those.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate that because I think that person might have been sort of a lead in the dog park community, so they can distribute that information. So then just one quick follow-up. This is also just from my understanding. So the language that was in the original Geobond ballot, right? So it came to us, we voted on it. It's not necessarily guaranteed that everything that was in the language will stay, given the cost of things, given some of what you said, the value-based engineering, like some of those things, right? Like it's not necessarily a guarantee that what was there will continue.
Councilor Bencomo, Mayor, Councilor Bencomo, you're correct. However, when the question came out, it just included a 2-acre dog park. It didn't.
So there was no specific.
There was no specific. So through the public input, that's where we garnered that information, put them into the design, and then when we got the cost based on the best ranked vendor to move forward with the project, that's where we proceeded to go through and value engineer the project to bring it within the construction budget.
That's actually super helpful and exactly what I needed to hear, David. Thank you. And thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Councilor Beta-Stewie.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, David, so much. I am really excited to see these projects come to light. I think they're going to be so helpful for our community. And then, of course, looking forward to see what else we could perhaps bring in. Councilor Bencomo did have one of my questions with the dog parks. We have been getting quite a bit of emails and concerned people for that. The only other question I had, Mayor touched upon it briefly, was that of the costs of items. Do you think now that we are at a place where some of those rising costs are starting to level at all, or do we still anticipate the need to adjust for potential increases?
Councilor Beta-Stewie, Mayor David Cedillo, for the record, we're not seeing any leveling off at this point in time right now. As such, as we move forward, we are anticipating and trying to work through those costs for future projects as well. So one of the big things that we do have is those other projects that are not under contract. We're moving as quickly as possible to get them under contract. That way we don't feel the effect of those costs as much.
Thank you. I think that's really important for us to know. And then moving forward with those contracts that we have secured, I'm assuming it's probably written in if costs go for the raw materials go above a certain thing, we will still have to adjust for those.
Councilor Beta-Stewie, Mayor, there are provisions in the contract that do allow us to entertain those costs.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much, and thank you for all the work on this and for your team.
Thank you.
Before I get to Councilor Vasquez, let me just read two of the bond, the actual language on the actual bond election. So number one was, shall the city issue general obligation bonds payable from property taxes in an amount up to $16,900,000 to construct improvements to parks, including sports fields and other related facilities, approved by 57%. Number two, shall the city issue general obligation bonds payable from property taxes in amount up to $9,800,000 to construct a new animal shelter facility and related improvements, approved 67%. So it was very broad. I mean, so staff was doing their best to try to bring in all of this together. And then, like I said, with the cost, COVID, everything just kind of coming to a head, doing the best we can. But, and like David said, the city's looking at some different additional monies to come up with at least the restroom. And I didn't know about the dawn to dusk on the dog park. That makes sense. Let's see who's next. Councilor Vasquez.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Cedillo. I too want to compliment you and your team, the whole staff, on the progress thus far, especially given the increases in supplies and the shortage of perhaps labor and contractors and subcontractors. As we know, I'm sure the housing industry is taking up a lot of that business right now. And so I'm sure it's not easy to get good folks, but I really appreciate your presentation today and seeing the progress to date. I do have just two quick questions. One is around the signage. I think we had talked maybe about this time last year about getting some signs up at the construction sites that identify these projects as Geobond projects, and perhaps it'd say, hey, this is your Geobond dollars at work. I think it'd just be great if we're not doing that currently, maybe we are, to showcase that to the public as they do drive by. I know we've done that with previous.
Uh-oh. Is that me or you that froze?
I'm not frozen.
Councilor Vasquez.
Councilor Vasquez.
Councilor Vasquez froze.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll circle back to him. So we'll go to you, Councilor Flotis, and then go back to Councilor Vasquez after him.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you so much, David Cedillo, for your presentation. And sitting on the City Art Board, Tony Trevino presented, because the City Art Board gets a percentage of the cost of building and is able to then do some public art. And the Animal Service Center originally had a higher ceiling, but because of the cost of lumber, which is extraordinarily high, coming from Canada, the idea of the potential artwork had to be revisited. So it's absolutely true that COVID has had a horrible impact, but or a horrible impact on our costs from lumber and stuff. But I do know that there are some the treaty between Canada, Mexico, and the United States it replaces NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, but it's very similar. And so it makes me think of procurement. I know this is tangential, Mr. Mayor, forgive me, but I'm just thinking in terms of procurement, if there's anything in our contracts that we can say that, say an act of God, such as COVID, would maybe shelter us from escalating prices. And so, but I think all that being said, and I'm putting it out there just because I know that our staff listen to our meetings, and sometimes maybe what is said in maybe like a board meeting doesn't necessarily get to everybody on staff and administration. But I do want to say that I've had questions about the dog park, David, and I don't know if you or Sonia can answer this. People want to make sure, I've had several constituents in District 6 who actually go out to the dog park on Hadley, want to make sure that the park is still going to have big dogs, little dogs. And one constituent said, well, it'd be nice if we also had a place for large dogs and small dogs to commingle. So, I mean, you get it all over, you get the entire spectrum there. So could you answer that question? in terms of the design of the park at this point, David, or is that within your parameters, your field?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Councilor Flores. Mayor, and there is separation at each site for small dogs and large dogs. There is separation with a fence. However, there isn't a co-mingled area, as this was designed with input, and the majority would like to see a small dog area and a large dog area.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cedillo. And then another question I have for you, Mr. Mayor, and for our entire administration, maybe the city manager or whatever. There's been a question as to, well, I'll ask this question later. It's really not even tangential to what Mr. said. Well, it is somewhat tangential. It's all tangential because it's all city business. But thank you very much, Mr. Cedillo, and thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilor.
Let's see if Councilor Vasquez is back yet. He has his hand up, so that's a good sign. Councilor Vasquez, are you? Yeah.
Yeah, can you hear me, Mayor? Sorry about that. Okay, I got some connection issues here now and then. Yeah, so the question, Mr. Cedillo, was around the signage, Geobond project signs. I think it'd be a great way to showcase that these are, Geobond dollars at work at some of these various sites. We've talked about that in the past, and if I remember correctly, I think we were going to recycle some of the signs that we had up for a previous CIP projects around the city. So wondering if those signs are up or if there's still plan to put those up at Geobond sites.
Councilor Vasquez, Mayor, yes, we do have one. We do have a sign up. Since, for example, we have the Hadley Avenue Sports Complex, there is a sign right in front of MAG before the entrance that has the information that we talked about with the Go Bond logo on it. The other projects, since they are very scattered, sometimes not seen very well by the driving public, for this instance, we put up one sign to hit all of them. We're still working to see if we can find some smaller ones. But again, as we move forward with each site, say like the Animal Services Center, we'd be able to put one up there. Let me check on the one for the fire station because I believe that one should be up, but we'll double check with staff.
Hey, David.
Yes, Tony.
Mayor, Councilor Vasquez, this is Tony Trevino, the Deputy Director of Public Works. We do have smaller ones like David had mentioned at the parks. Instead of 4x8 full signs, where we have multiple sites, we have some 4x4 signs put together for all the individual parks. As well as the trails, there will be about 4 to 5 signs along the trail at major intersections of the roadways to depict where these trails are going to be occurring.
That's terrific. Thank you, Tony and David. I think that's great. And to be honest, I think if we can, and they're not a public safety issue or hazard, we should leave some of those up, I think, for a period of time after these projects are completed, because when the public does get to interact with these new facilities, as you mentioned, maybe they can't see them now because of the construction or they're out of the way. But, we just want to make sure that the public knows that these facilities were constructed using their Geobond. I think that's part of the strategy in getting a future Geobond on the books here for additional projects. So thank you. And then the other comment I had, David, apart from just praising you and your team for the wonderful work that you've done to get us here, is around the dog park as well. And one of the concerns that I think we haven't addressed yet, but we should really think about for the future, is the dawn till dusk policy, or dusk till dawn policy, because in the winter hours, I do agree that, when the sun sets around as early as probably 4:30, 5 o'clock, and folks aren't out of work yet, they essentially don't get to use the dog park during the day, right? Because the sun goes down so early in the winter hours. And so having lights so that we can open up those dog parks, especially in the winter, from a reasonable time, 5 o'clock to 8 o'clock or 5 o'clock to 9 o'clock, is really important, I think. Otherwise, the working class of folks from 8 to 5 won't get to use the dog park at all, unless they go very early in the morning. And so I just want to put that out there for consideration in terms of future improvements to the park. I really do think we should have some lights and perhaps extend that policy a little bit in the winter. So thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Tony and David.
Thank you, Counselor.
Thank you, Counselor. All right, Counselor Sorg?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, to pick up on what Councilor Vasquez says, the lights in the dog park shouldn't have to be very big. Just a couple lights there at the entrance and then shining them over to the park. It's a small park. We shouldn't have to pay a lot of money for a minimal amount of lights there. So yeah, it would be good to have something like that. But I really want to emphasize the fact that we need signage on these projects. If those that were on the council at the time when we passed the Hold Harmless GRT, we had several projects across the city that Hold Harmless GRT was paying for. And that was really a good look for the city to have good signage out for all the projects that we did then, half a dozen or more. So I strongly suggest we get some kind of signage at each project. And like Councilor Vasquez said, keep it up for a while after it's all built. I don't have any questions. I just have, I'll call it a concern. I've got on my screen here the plans for the Animal Service Center. I've been looking it over. As much as I can tell from the plans that were sent to us by Jamie Rickman today, or was it yesterday? I'm quite impressed. Of course, for $9 million, I would expect some super duper kind of facility. But it brings to mind a few years ago when former Mayor Pro Tem Emeritus Greg Smith and I attended a National League of Cities convention in Austin, Texas. And we did several tours of some new things that they were doing. And one of the tours was to their Animal Service Center, or maybe they call it the Adoption Center too. And, you know, I can't say for sure, obviously, looking at plans, comparing to what I saw several years ago. But boy, I tell you what, I don't think there's a huge difference between the two. What I saw in Austin, Texas, and what we have here in front of us. I'm sure it could certainly have been a little bit more, but not a lot than what we have here. And if you look up the population of Austin, Texas, it's, almost a million people that live there. And so what comes to my mind when I see the comparison here is where's the equity in this, what we're doing here with this animal shelter? Does it really promote equity amongst the people in the city here? I can see it promotes equity amongst the pets in the city, the animals that we have. But I'm curious to know what this means to Las Cruces. Will having this animal shelter like this costing $9 million lower our poverty numbers in the city? I always want to look and see what we're doing and how it affects things like equity and poverty that we have in the city. And so, I mean, this is what the people voted for. We'll have to give it to them, of course. But I just wonder sometimes what we're doing sometimes when we do things like this. It's going to be a nice animal shelter. And we do need pet parks for sure. Because every time you walk out in neighborhoods, you're always seeing pet waste on the sidewalks or in areas because people don't pick it up. So I just wanted to point that out. It's just my take on this. And that's all. And by the way, David, and your whole crew there and Public Works and the city as a whole, good job for all the work you're doing here. I agree with that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilor Sorg. Mayor, at this point in time, there's been a lot of gratitude and thanks towards myself as part of this. However, I do want to let this be known that it's staff that has produced all the hard work for this Geobond as we move forward. So, and not only in Public Works, we have other departments as well, Fire, Parks and Rec. We also have other departments involved that have helped through this. So I would like to extend my gratitude to them to helping make this a success as we move forward. Thank you, Councilor Sorg.
Yo, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
And just a correction, Councilor Sorg, Greg Smith is not a mayor pro tem emeritus. He was a mayor pro tem, but not emeritus. Just for the correction. Councilor Flores.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, you know, I wanted to say that Gabe brought up the issue of the dawn to dusk lighting in the parks. And I thought it was tangential, but perhaps it isn't. And I know that we received, and just for the very same reasons that that Gabe expressed, I received letters from constituents who had those concerns about the use of the park. And it applies really to other age groups as well. You want lighting in the parks, of course, for people who have 8 to 5 jobs, because in the winter, fall, winter, and early spring, we still have very short days. So daylight. I don't know, and I think it is a safety issue for parks to have lighting, 24/7. It probably invites a lot of, potential problem. I don't know. But it's definitely something that we should look at. Perhaps we can, I don't know if it'll require an ordinance, Mr. Mayor. I don't know if it'll require parks taking administrative measures. But it definitely comes up. It's all tangential. It's all how are we using our lands? And excuse me for a second. You probably heard me scream at her all the way from my house. No barking, Edie. But the other, I mean, with all due respect, Mr. Sorg, Councilor Sorg, your question about equity, and yes, it's absolutely true that the money that was voted on by the voters, by the people who live here in Las Cruces who pay taxes, they voted on this because the things that everything we voted on makes the quality of our life better. And so, I mean, is the $9.6 million going to feed people or give us better schools? Well, probably yes, or maybe not, but it's all about how we treat everyone that we live amongst, our animals. And the beauty of the new center going up is that the old center is going to be a spay and neuter center. And the budget has already been allocated for a new veterinarian to help out with that. And so we're going to have a humane society that cares about its animals. And Clint Thacker has been doing a fantastic job, and the boards that have served in conjunction with the county, the JPA, past boards, not just the current one that Councilor Benavidez Center and Mayor Pro Tem Gandara and I serve on now. This all goes to the kind of a city that we want to be, and it's the quality of life for everybody, Councilor Sorg. So it's very good for the city. It's very good for the city, and we have to look out for those that can't look out for themselves. And so that's to answer your question. But thank you, everybody. Thank you, staff, for the fantastic work you do and making our city a better place. And thank you again, Mayor.
Are you going to feed Edie now? Because she's probably hungry.
She's already been fed. She had her din-din.
Okay.
So she's done for the day.
Okay.
But thank you for asking. I'm glad you care about her as much as I do. Thank you.
Councilor Benavidez Center.
Thank you, Mayor. And just to address Councilor Sorg, I think, concerns over this type of project. coming in after these were already voted on from the community. But I will say, I know that there was a rigorous process of getting information on what even projects were going to be submitted to voters to consider on. So that was step one. And then the voters had to decide on those. So phase two, and then looking at what the projects will do. As Councillor Flores says, this is also a quality of life issue. When we have extra space for more spay and neuterings, then we can do things like with our new, or potentially new, ordinances on the track, neuter, and release programs, so we can make sure we're being effective with those types of items and others. So it all kind of can tie in together. And then it is using that voice of the community. It is their will in their projects. And so looking forward, we'll be able to do the same sort of community outreach to get what they would like to see in their community. Thank you, Mayor.
Absolutely. Councilor Flores, you just didn't put your hand down, I guess.
No, I'm sorry. It's just that Edie's been barking. Thank you. I don't have a question. Thank you.
So blame everything on poor Edie. Okay.
Edie, everything's her fault. It used to be my mom's fault. Now it's her fault. Anyway.
All right. So that's it, David. That's it for the update. Anything else?
No, sir. That was it. Thank you, Mayor.
Very good. Okay. Thank you again for this information. It's good stuff. All right. So last, we're going to go to the annual Las Cruces City Art Board update. And it looks like Ceci Vasconcelos will be presenting.
That is correct. So let me just get my screen shared. There, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So good afternoon, Mayor and City Council. My name is Ceci Vasconcelos, and I am the Art Program Coordinator under the Quality of Life Department. Thank you for inviting us to present an update on the City of Las Cruces Public Art Program. We also have a special presentation by City Art Board member Saud Ramirez titled Public Art and Civic Spaces. I will present first and allow for questions. Then I will introduce Ms. Ramirez, who will follow with their presentation. Since it's been a little while, I'll begin with information you may already know, but that serves as a reminder that public art can be part of much of the work that we do for our community. What is public art? It can be elements of a public place that are designed by a professional artist or artist team. Public art can be permanent, temporary, and or functional. It can be standalone or integrated into the architecture, landscape, or infrastructure such as public buildings, bridges, and parks. Public art can be the sole creation of the artist, and it may result from a design team approach in which artists work on project teams with architects, engineers, landscape architects, and others to design and create public places. For the purposes of the City of Las Cruces Public Art Program, it is also defined as art in city-owned, publicly accessible buildings and other city-owned public spaces. I included a few photos here of public art that are part of the city collection. You can see our iconic Roadrunner and the water towers murals. There's the path next to Thomas Brannigan Memorial Library. So just a few examples. And these are some of the murals around town that are also considered part of the city art, public art collection. In 2013, City Council established the City Art Board to advise City Council on matters related to public art, making clear that public art was a priority for Las Cruces. The volunteer board serves in an advisory capacity to the City Council and assists staff in the development of guidelines, programming, and administration of policies, rules, and regulations, recommendations for new art-related projects and programs, It participates in the organization and administration of the city public art collections, and it makes formal recommendations to the City Council relative to the acquisition and commissioning of public art installations. As the art program coordinator, I serve as the liaison between the City Art Board and the city to help them carry out their duties. Our current City Art Board members are Christina Ballou, the chair, Alyssa Grayson Albach, Vice Chair, Katrina Chandler, Secretary, Saul Ramirez, Member, and Chantel Yazzie Martin, Member. This Zoom photo was taken in early March for an article about the board featured in the Las Cruces Bulletin on March 19th. Susan Frary, who's pictured here, has since stepped off the board due to term limits, and I wanted to take this opportunity to thank her for her years of service, and I'm sure she will be very involved in future public art activities. As interest in public art continued to grow in Las Cruces, and the board was tasked with establishing a dedicated funding source for the solicitation of artists and the procurement, installation, and maintenance of current and future pieces of public art, it became apparent that a master plan was needed to guide the program. The Las Cruces Public Art Master Plan, which guides the Las Cruces Public Art Program, or LCPA, was approved by City Council in early 2020. The LCPA Master Plan provides guidance that will ensure sustainable funding sources for public art, make the most of the city's resources, and ensure that the city's public art activities make an impact on Las Cruces and respond to the community's needs. It is meant to be a valuable and often consulted tool for the City Art Board, city staff, council, and anyone interested in collaborating with the city on public art. It establishes a vision and provides administrative and programmatic recommendations to guide the work of building and maintaining the city's public art collection. The LCPA Master Plan is digitally available on the city's website at las-cruces.org/public art. I have also provided hard copies of the plan for each of the council members, and I delivered them to your offices recently, and I'm working on getting more hard copies for anyone else who would like one. The master plan outlines the LCPA goals as elevate Las Cruces as the arts capital of southern New Mexico, add visual interest and beauty to the city, activate public spaces, improve visual identity, and make art and culture a way of life. To accomplish these goals, LCPA should develop an annual public art work plan according to the LCPA Master Plan. The plan should provide a detailed description of LCPA priorities and anticipated income and expenditures for the coming fiscal year and projections for the following 5 fiscal years. It should list projects that are expected to begin in the coming fiscal year and projects that are carrying over from previous years and special projects. There should also be an annual evaluation of the previous and current fiscal year to date to collect data to describe program achievements. It also informs LCPA's annual budget request, which will include % for art funds in the capital improvement program in the near future, and funds for operations, programs, and communications in the general fund. The City Art Board began a draft of their first annual plan for fiscal year 2019 to 2020. But due to the pandemic, most of the plan was delayed and carried over to this fiscal year, 2020-2021. This slide shows what the plan looks like, and I will talk about some of the projects listed here and their status. The Tierra Sagrada Library Mural. Cruces Creatives, a local nonprofit organization, collaborated with the City Art Board and Thomas Brannigan Memorial Library to complete this colorful mural located on the wall behind the library amphitheater. The project was done with funding from grants, and over 300 community members participated in painting the project. The theme of Tierra Sagrada, which means sacred earth, is agriculture and the environment. And thanks to a paint by numbers approach, people of all ages and artistic abilities were able to participate. The mural was completed in December 2019. The Alameda Arroyo Multi-Use Trail Tunnel was another collaborative mural project between the Parks and Recreation Department, Las Cruces Public Art, Keep Las Cruces Beautiful, and grant funds from New Mexico Conservation Corps. For this project, KLCB posted an employment opportunity and applicants went through the hiring process. Per grant requirements, project participants had to be between the ages of 16 to 20 years old. A local artist was hired to be the facilitator of the project, and the team only had 60 days to conceptualize, design, and paint the mural. The tunnel has 10-foot high walls and is about 60 feet long, and it was winter. Not to mention, we were in the midst of a global pandemic. But they did it, and the mural was completed in December 2020. Art was included in the Calle Abuelo Neighborhood Park Master Plan, and the City Art Board used $7,500 from their Capital Improvement Program art budget to purchase Tree of Knowledge by Jeffy Brewer, which was part of the Art in Public Places New Mexico Arts Catalog. It was chosen by the City Art Board and an ad hoc selection committee. The art piece was installed in September 2020. The City Art Board presented the recommended art design for the City Hall lobby art project to Council in December 2019. The design by tile artist Debbie Dickinson was approved, and installation was expected to be completed by early 2021. The project was postponed due to the pandemic, but we are back on track to installing this piece by the end of June, if not sooner. Fire Station number 3, public art project. Fire Station number 3, the new station being built on Valley Drive, will have artwork attached to the building itself. We posted a call for entry in fall 2020. 107 applications were received, and currently the selection committee is in the finalist phase of the selection process. Budget for this project is $40,000, and the schematic shows where the art will be located in the yellow area, right up here. Another new facility that will include art is the Animal Service Center of the Mesilla Valley. The call for artists was posted for 4 weeks and closed March 31st, 2021. We received 139 submissions through the CAFE platform, which we use. The call was nationwide, but we also ran an ad on the city's social media targeting local and regional artists in southern New Mexico and El Paso. The selection committee is currently in phase 2 of judging. This piece is for a freestanding sculpture, which will stand in the yellow highlighted area that you see there in the picture. The budget for this is $68,000. The Munson Senior Center had a $3,400 art budget allocated to the site from New Mexico Arts Art in Public Places, or AIPP program. The funding was 1% of 2 site improvement projects paid for by Geobonds. 2 art pieces were chosen by the selection committee from the New Mexico Arts juried collection: Happiness is the Path by Kathy Haight and Blue Corn by Juliana Kerwin. Installation is scheduled for May 2021, and I'm happy to report that last week we did actually install Blue Corn, which is the lower picture there. And it looks beautiful, so you'll have to, once the center opens, you'll have to go by and take a look at it in person. The Earth and Cosmos mosaic repair. The mosaic located in La Placita downtown was damaged in December 2020 when a water line broke beneath it. We are working with the artist to formulate a plan to do what is best for the repair restoration of the mosaic. It's a delicate and complicated process which could take at least a year to complete. The short-term plan is to map the broken piece, then move it to a temporary location until we have a plan and contract in place to begin work. The damaged area in the pavement will be temporarily backfilled and barricaded for public safety. Other projects that have carried over are the annual plan for Klein Park art project. The City Art Board has a committee in progress. The committee will develop a plan for artwork to be placed in the park aligned with the Klein Park master plan. Representatives from the neighborhood community, the Arts and Cultural District, and Indigenous tribal families from the area have been invited to be on the committee. Refuge, which is the purple sculpture there, is a LCPA maintenance project. We are working with the artist to contract his services to repair and clean the sculpture located in Lions Park Community Park. And ongoing work, the City Art Board has created committees to help reach the goals as outlined in the LCPA Master Plan. Committees include the Communications Committee that will help with creating content for LCPA social media and provide input for website improvements for starters. The Research and Development Committee, which will assist with networking and gathering data. The Public Outreach Committee, which plan community engagement events and artist workshops. Smaller projects being developed for approval include a rotating art project, which, if approved, may incorporate Roadrunner bus shelters for temporary art installations. Another project, if approved, is a QR code interpretive storytelling collaborative project, which proposes using QR codes selected public art locations that will link to a recording of the story behind the artwork. We will also be considering other art in public places artwork opportunities. The proposed percent for art ordinance is the conversion of the current resolution to ordinance. This ordinance will provide funding for the acquisition of public art related to the city's capital improvement program. The ordinance aims to be purpose-based rather than project-based. It will also include a percent designated for continuous maintenance of public art assets, as recommended by industry best practices. It is taking longer than anticipated to complete the draft, but we want it to be thorough, thoughtful, and diligent about how the Las Cruces Public Art Program will be funded in order to write an ordinance that aligns with a developing program for years to come. And I can report that the current draft is now with the bond board for review. So hopefully we'll be able to move much quicker through that process once we get their feedback. So that is my presentation, and I will stand for questions.
Thank you, Ceci. It looks like Councilor Beta-Stuvey, Councilor Vasquez have questions.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Ceci, for this presentation. I'm really looking forward to seeing the upcoming ordinances. I know that they will be passing through our Quality of Life PRC once you all get through them. So I do look forward to seeing that. One of the items, if you could go back to page slide 10, please.
Sure.
Thank you.
There we go.
When looking at all these projects, and you even mentioned it a bit on the information that you gave me to my office, there is not a ton of opportunities listed here in District 2. And so this is more for my fellow counselors. We had this issue coming up with parks as well. There haven't been any new items for District 2. It seems like this with the public art. And I just want to make a bit of a, an ask for consideration for that equity, especially since our district is one of our aging infrastructure areas and could really use a lot of these wonderful things and something new and something that the public and the community can help work on together. I think a lot of the public art pieces that have been like at the library where the community got to come and participate together, it builds the community and really can help change how people view an area. So I do appreciate that. I have a question on the art installation that is supposed to go to City Hall. I know that there had been the extensions due to COVID for it. However, do you all anticipate that it will be finalized by May or June? Is that?
Mayor and Councilor, this is Ceci Vasconcellos for the record. Yes, we extended her contract until the end of June. We do not anticipate needing to extend that any longer than that. I have been in contact with the artist, and she has sent me pictures to show her progress, and they are so close. Last I spoke to them, they were looking into making arrangements for travel and looking for a date that they could schedule that for. So it's going to happen.
Okay, great. And was it the travel portion that was the holdup? Because I would say, if she had and I don't know if there was a private studio or how you would be able to do work from home for art. But I was just wondering what that issue really was for that extension.
Mayor and Councilor, Ceci again for the record. I'm not exactly sure what the issues were. They indicated that it was more of a pandemic situation where they couldn't travel, possibly not being able to get the supplies they needed because businesses were closed. I believe she lives in Washington State, so she would need to travel from there. And so these were some of the situations that were holding them from doing this. And she does have her own studio there, and that's where she's been working from. They will transport the pieces that they've completed in the studio, but they're not put together. It's kind of like a puzzle. It looks like a puzzle. So they'll bring the pieces. They'll do some of the work here on site to complete the project.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ceci. Mm-hmm. I do want to say thank you. You mentioned it on slide 19 with the potential of including some art in Klein Park, that you were bringing in Indigenous voices. Within our Quality of Life Committee, we talked a lot about the very unique history that Las Cruces has with different tribes, and making sure that when we're telling the story of those tribes, that we're getting their voice and their perspective on how they want to share that story. And that's a valuable part of that art. So I do want to thank you for that inclusion.
Yes, thank you.
That's all the questions I have.
Thank you. Councilor Vasquez.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Ceci. I really like what the City Art Board is doing. I like that we have some new perspectives on the board, some new members that can help to continue, I think, the amazing public service that previous board members have contributed to growing this program and creating the public art master plan. I'm especially excited about things like the rotating artwork on the bus stops that could tell a QR code story. I think that's the kind of innovation in public art that I like to see, right? Because it goes beyond something at a bus stop to an actual storytelling feature that someone can pull up on their phone. And I think that really just enriches what this like two-dimensional art can actually do. So I encourage more of that. I did have a question around the inventory of public property that could be used for future art projects. I know we've talked in the past about things that are as simple as utility boxes, sprinkler boxes at our parks, our existing infrastructure. I'm thinking some of our city wells, some of our older city wells that don't look perhaps as new as they once did. I think those could all be great candidates for, public art, and wouldn't cost us really much besides the cost of the paint and a contract to an artist. And so, Ceci, do you know if that inventory has been done, or if the City Art Board is working on that at all?
Mayor and Councilor Vasquez, Ceci Vasconcelos for the record. We are putting together an inventory of public art assets, but we're also looking, that would fall more under probably special projects and looking at what locations and possibilities are there. So it's part of the master plan. And so it'll happen. I think that's a really good way to address the lack of public art in some of these districts that don't have CIP programs attached to them usually. So, which is where we get our funding. So, so these would be considered special projects. So yeah, that is definitely something we will consider.
Thank you, Ceci, and maybe this can be a topic of discussion for a future quality of
Uh-oh.
I think you froze again.
Yeah, look, he froze again. I think he was trying to say a future topic for the quality of life discussion. So of course, the chairperson is Councilor Beta Stuvey.
Yes.
So, okay. Anything else, Ceci?
Mayor, that is all for me. Oh, if there aren't any other questions, I would now like to introduce City Art Board member Saud Ramirez. Mix Ramirez is an artist and art historian from El Paso and Juarez, whose work is a multidisciplinary research practice focused on decolonization and more recently on civics. So this is for his special presentation. Let me stop sharing my screen. Here we go.
Hi, Mayor and Council. I'd like to go ahead and just share my screen here real quick. Alrighty, this is going to be, I am Saul Ramirez, and I'm here to present to you guys my research that I've done on public art and civic spaces for this city. I would like to begin today by acknowledging the long and historic presence of the Piro Mantotiwa tribe here in the town of Mesilla Valley, and I acknowledge the rightful sovereignty over this landscape now occupied by the city of Las Cruces and the government of New Mexico. I would like to acknowledge and show respect to their independent political presence, for which they're still fighting to be federally recognized. I also acknowledge their long cultural and ancestral ties to the people south in Juarez and El Paso, as well as to the people north in the Pueblos, as well as to many other relative nations from across the continent. I acknowledge a long generosity in the tribe in welcoming a global community here, which is a generosity they've shown since the days of the Spanish, and which they still show today in the wonderful presence of our university community and our U.S.-Mexico border. I acknowledge their long and unending work in the maintaining of their communities and in protecting their environmental integrity of the landscape from the dangers of abuse and exploitation that has been here since the earliest days of colonization. I acknowledge the challenges that they face, maintaining their political integrity and independence amidst the violence of war, cultural erasures, genocide, and economic disenfranchisement, which have characterized the bulk of colonial relations. Now, my presentation in general is about acknowledgements. And as an artist and an art historian, I know that my work is a work of acknowledging the world, whether it be in my visual modes of representation, as well as in my interpretive methodological practices in research, which I call my historical practice. These are really two sides of the same goal for me, which is to properly express my world and my community. Proper choices depend on having proper pictures, and every act of representation takes on this important task. Today, mathematical and scientific figurations are prioritized in public and professional fields because of the certainty which these fields provide. But as we have seen over the past decades, we have actually seen great defunding of the arts, and the state keeps continually defunding them for this in preference of STEM fields in schools and implicitly in our economy. This is actually a decade-long pattern in which faith has been lost in the capacity for art to shape our world and our communities. Now, Las Cruces has always been a crossroads, and Las Cruces historian Gordon Owen suggests that this may be one of the reasons we're named Las Cruces. There has always been a great activity of movement in and out of this area, and it has always been tied to the history of El Paso as a passage to the west between Arizona and Texas, all the way up north to Colorado, as well as passages south into Mexico. This landscape has always been intrinsically connected to the comings and goings of various global communities, which call this place home. Now, this is the reason that in 1853, the president of a South Carolina railroad company named James Gadsden purchased the land in orders of President of the Confederacy, James Davis. After the arrival of Confederate soldiers like John Robert Baylor, the tragic namesake of our own Baylor Canyon, as well as Union soldiers like Colonel James Carleton, we see that the Mesilla Valley played an important role in establishing statehood of New Mexico as an extension of Civil War politics. Once a part of the Confederate territory of Arizona under the invasion of the secessionists in the 1860s, it is here in the Mesilla Valley that the U.S.-Mexico border was negotiated, and that Gadsden, in search of railroad passages west, also sought to expand the slave economy. It was even known that people used to be able to cross from Las Cruces over to Mesilla to escape the United States into freedom. This began the battle between the Union and the Confederacy, which the local people of this town came to pay for in the forms of property confiscation from both Union and Confederate forces as political tools to win their wars. As historian Jerry Dean Thompson tells us, perhaps nowhere in New Mexico was the military as oppressive and as big a burden as the local population in the Mesilla Valley. Now, historian Paul L. Hine says that here in New Mexico, there's been a long history of political, economic, and social institutions that keep being superimposed on the native cultures, by which he means Native American culture and then the Spanish cultures that were here. It was a slow process when the Americans came because New Mexico did not have the attractions of wealth that might bring forth of the Anglo-American settlers, as he says. But once the railroads did cross, we were flooded from the east, and American politics came to dominate the majority of New Mexico's government. Felipe Gonzalez, a sociologist from UNM, shows that there's a complex political history in the state that is defined by a series of violent political dispossessions. There was an early uncertainty in local Nuevo Mexicanos, as he says, about the annexation into statehood. And at the end of the 19th century, there was a motivated, aggressive European politicians arrived and took hold of a newly established Republican Party and used it mostly in the interest of themselves and their Euro-American allies to the point of statehood. Now, I use this history here to framework some questions and some challenges which I like to pose to my city and to my community about what the future of development in this town should look like. Given our past, I really want to ask what our civic duties are and what responsibilities are, and to ask the ways in which we can reimagine development. I will highlight the important relationship between art and between history, to ask exactly what role we could be playing in the future development of our town. Now, there is a term that art historian Jerry Sweeney uses to define this aesthetic movement very popular in New Mexico called cowboy art, which is underlined, as he says, by racial and economic pressures, which are used to tell narratives about colonization and about this type of art. When this type of art has actually been assiduously marketed throughout the state's history. He says that his essay is specifically concerned with an American fantasy of history that first emerged in the late 19th century and is perpetuated by an association of contemporary painters known as the Cowboy Artists of America. It is a style of work that is defined by its romanticism and by its themes of the West as untamed land, as violent and lawless, often depicting the glorified representation of European peoples' conquest as harbingers of civilization. Originally written for the catalog of an exhibition that happened in Albuquerque in 1992, it was from a collection of the National Cowboy Hall of Fame Museum in Oklahoma City, but the museum actually removed the essay for being too unpatriotic and threatening to pull the exhibition altogether. And from this, I hope to really acknowledge just the great political nature that art carries, and also suggest the subtlety and vast implications of it and our responsibility, and begin to suggest what our responsibilities to them should be. Now, there's various works across our galleries and in our collection that follow this aesthetic type of dispossession, as well as historical dispossessions, such as the works of Anthony Pennock, which often depict romanticized images of New Mexico landscape against settlerist narratives of the colonization by the Spanish. La Entrada specifically depicts Manso people doing the snake dance, which is actually both incorrect in content and in representation. It is a great shame that even after leaders from the Piro Manso-Tiwa tribe reached out to PENOC about their inaccurate representations, the request to remove it was actually ignored. This is tragic because it does not just characterize the general attitudes between European institutions and our indigenous hosts, but it also glorifies the entrance of a Spanish into a region, sanitized into an image of colonization and genocide that is both physical and cultural, which are hidden beneath its aesthetic appeal. And here are also some images of his water towers, which follow some of the same themes. Now, although I think this is a much more complicated issue than just saying taking them down, we should really consider what it means to when we're assessing our collection. I would like this moment to actually point out other problematic patterns in how we purchase art in the city, which includes this recent accession of Debbie Dickinson's artwork for the City Hall, which is actually going to include a Zia symbol from our state's flag. This is not only problematic because in the 90s, the Zia Pueblo demanded $70 million as compensation for the unauthorized use of their symbol on our flag, but also because they have continually expressed their discontent at its use and unauthorized commercial products. Furthermore, I want to really ask what the benefit there is in exporting over $32,000 of money into outside from our community, and to someone who not just has little knowledge of our own history here, but will likely not put the money back into our economy. I would like to acknowledge from this that art is always a matter of civic responsibility and of power, because art is a matter of civics. Civics is ultimately a matter of dealing with the social debt that is left to us by our fellow citizens, and it is how we take care of each other. Art as an active representation takes up the role of the city and of the state, which is to represent their communities. Art exists somewhere between the public and the private as this place where we can communicate and express. And in this instance, public art becomes a common realm of civic duty between the city and its citizens. And from this, I really want to ask ourselves, like, what public art really is. In our master plan, although wonderfully detailed, it actually fails to provide any clear definitions or functions to public art and what it should actually fulfill. Although there are common themes that it touches on throughout, woven into various parts of the plan, including improving quality of life, beautifying our city, and improving the city's investments. It is also mentioned that public art is mostly city on city property, but as I like to point at Norma, sorry, I'm trying to remember her last name, Chaides, from our museum, from our proper Las Cruces Museum here. Yes, thank you. She actually says that as leader of the Las Cruces, of the Murals of Las Cruces project, she uses this term to say that it's any art in the public right of way. And by this, I'd like to say that also, like, the most explicit definition that is given in the public art plan is in relation to the Las Cruces Public Arts Program, which is responsible for, which it's, as it quoted in the master plan, it is a program responsible for building and caring for the city of Las Cruces Public Arts Collection. And so it is talked about as being a mechanism, which I believe it is a mechanism of care. And so when we're talking about art in the public right of way and talking about, like, the care that it takes to participate in public art, I am really asking questions about civic duty. And I want to ask what it means here when our town has actually had a history of removing artworks, specifically within murals. And Norma herself actually documents this with Murals of Las Cruces. And she documents it in her wonderful presentation that she gave at the Brannigan Cultural Center, which I suggest everybody should watch. And I actually provide a link in my PowerPoint. She points out with great clarity the modes in which our murals have often been subject to removal for reasons cited being as either too political or too controversial. But in light of the refusal to remove the image of the snake dance from La Entrada, I would really like to ask, controversial to who? And also too political for who? If it is our responsibility in the art board to care for the city's collection, we must ask, whose art are we collecting, are we caring for, and are we preserving? And what stories does this tell? It is the city's duty to represent its communities, and that includes the labor of inscribing and interpreting histories, duties of archiving and conservation, which are modes by which the city actually acknowledges its citizens. There is a responsibility of the state because the state's responsibility is to represent all of us, and it takes the responsibility of the lives of every citizen. What matters most in the civic contemplation is that the power of the state has in recognizing individuals as citizens and giving them or making them rightful inheritors of the state's care and support of their human rights, and the responsibility that the city has to honor them. Public art, like a democratic government, is a place of acknowledgement, a place where all the lives are honored with representation, especially those who have been systematically and historically denied those means to be represented. For the state to protect people who already have power and representation is always an injustice. As an extension of art movements over the last decades, often called either relational aesthetics or social art, or what Claire Bishop termed the social turn in art back in 2006, much art has developed into explicit political and socially engaged practices. Nancy Atahania explores in her essay, which is actually in this book here, and her essay is titled The 13th Place and the 11th Question, where she asks in contemporary art what the job of an artist is, which she talks about it being the job of representing citizenry by expressing it and by performing it. By being collaborators that help us imagine new modes of relating with each other, the artist citizen is usually involved in the act of empowerment, which, as she says, implies that the artist citizen can help those lacking economic and cultural or political opportunities and entitlements. But because this often implies that the artist does not give up any of their own privileges when doing so, Atahania prefers the term called devolution instead, which implicates that the artist citizen is substantially and viscerally in the act of giving. And it implies that as a precondition to the development of a more equitable social relationship, the artist will give up some of their privileges and claims to expertise that reside in her under the unequitable system and transfer these to colleagues who lack them, essentially an act of redistribution. It really brings into question, what are the roles of artists in our communities? And what do we expect from our artists, as well as what do artists expect from us? Although artists are not politicians, I do believe art should do the work of opening up civic spaces to citizens who often don't have access to those spaces. New Mexican institutions are ultimately the result of colonization, and we must ask ourselves how these early institutions were intended to help when they were constructed in the first place. And as Michael P. Todaro and Stephen C. Smith show in their book, Economic Development Economics, they say colonization has had a deep impact on the development of those nations subjected to colonization because of the little incentive they have to uphold property rights, encourage investments, or even allow broad access to economic opportunities or political participation to those that they colonized. They acknowledge that in development economics, in addition to just being concerned with inefficient allocation of existing or scarce or idle productive resources and their sustained growth over time, it must also actually deal with social, political, and institutional mechanisms, both public and private, necessary to bring about rapid and large-scale improvements of level of living. And I'd like to quote here Irene Gomez Franco from her Sustainable Integrational Justice and Its End, in which she says, it is imperative to recognize the excessive emphasis that many economists place on economic growth as the only driving force for development, and the corresponding belief that growth axiomatically results in the benefit of all population sectors. And so by this, I want to really ask what we might mean by development, because despite massive leaps in technology and improvements in quality of life, Smith and Todaro actually show that poverty continues to be a big problem, and that traditional modes of classification for development in countries are centered around stock and bond markets, but they are actually very limited in telling us how prosperous a community is or in telling us what a community needs. So when we're actually talking about Las Cruces growing, we often mean in these industries up here. And as wonderful as many of these industries are, we must really be asking ourselves also who benefits from these industries and to what extent will our community actually benefit from them? How many locals will actually fill in the highest paying positions in these jobs, and how many experts will we actually be importing into our community? How many in our community will just become minimum wage laborers beneath these companies. When we ask ourselves in terms of other than just GDP, what development means, we must ask what opportunities are actually being offered to our communities and ask ourselves who has access to development altogether. As Todaro and Smith say, that some of the most important challenges of the 21st century are that many people who have just come out of poverty remain vulnerable, and that the natural environment is actually deteriorating and national economic growth remains uncertain. And so from this, we see that development doesn't happen equally, and art can offer creative ways to address some of these issues. It is capable of representing problems and offering solutions in imaginative ways. It can be serious and it can also be playful, like any good parent should be. And it can be engaging and educational. Disparity and inequity define for us the different gap between people's experience of progress and development. And it brings me to ask how cities are developed and who actually develops those cities. But more importantly, what impact does a city design have on its population? What resources do our citizens have available to construct and make decisions about their own city's design? I can only think about our own city's heavy dependence on roads and vehicles reinforcing an underdeveloped transportation system that has made it hard for me to even engage with public art. And over the past few weeks, I've had to learn the kind of work it takes to access them. How citizens can have better access to public art remains a challenge which, if solved, could have actually many unimagined social benefits, from a sense of pride to a sense of kinship and ability to move through our landscape, which are all necessary in thriving communities. It is important that we heal the relationship between civic institutions and their citizenry, as well as with their landscapes. A challenge which is truly global in scale, and we must ask how we want to participate locally in this global economy. And as a result of wealth disparity, we actually have seen development projects all over the world described by this word gentrification, which is summed up by some of Paul Goldberg's theories back in the 80s, who was the senior architecture critic of New York Times. And he actually championed these development projects that depended on the destruction of low-income property and cuts to various social services. It is a pattern which the Human Impact Partners documented and published in 2015 in a study of gentrification of Santa Fe, which actually found that by the 1980s, this type of urban and suburban development that was championed by Goldberg created new subdivisions throughout Santa Fe, dispossessing many of their homes. We must recognize the signs of gentrification which led to this and not believe that we're exempt from this pattern. As they show in their study, one example of this came from a lifetime Santa Fe resident who was quoted saying, "My cousin's family lived on a West Alto Street for generations. Then their house was condemned by the city, bought out, and now it's a casita B&B. They all now live on the west side." So when we're talking about our community, communities, we know that it is a city's choices where to put infrastructure, transit, affordable housing, and other resources significantly influences the shifts of population, which can occur unequally across income, across race, across age, and other demographic characteristics. Where people live, whether by individual choice or influenced by resource allocations, has serious long-lasting impacts on the health and well-being of a community. And in acknowledging all these new challenges which we are confronted with today, it is important to acknowledge the value of various community functions, including the arts, which can play an important role in meeting these challenges creatively, defining and representing our communities accurately, and communicating what they may need from their city. It'll help us to answer questions like how we talk about our communities and how we identify appropriate responses to their histories. What stories do we actually tell, and what stories are we using to justify development, and whose stories are being listened to? And in what ways can these shape our city, and what can public art do in this endeavor? I understand that as a community, we will all play our roles in development, and I acknowledge that it is a very difficult task. I ask our leaders today here to join me in this important work that is acknowledgement, to acknowledge the important role that public art plays in knowing and in shaping our community. Art speaks to many people, and it allows many people to speak. In a democratic system, there is still rarely a chance for citizens to express their needs directly to their government, and to therefore truly practice their citizenry. I acknowledge my privilege to be given the time and space to speak before you all, and the privilege of being heard seriously in a public institution. A privilege I may have worked hard for, but it is a privilege nonetheless, and we must acknowledge all the different hurdles which must be overcome every day by each of us to perform our citizenry. I believe that this begins with the proper and ethical representation necessary in opening up any democratic process. Thank you. Here's some of my bibliographies and some further readings if you guys are interested in other research I'm doing that I might not have cited directly.
Okay, well, thank you, Saul. We have a couple counselors who have some comments. Councilor Bencomo, Councilor Vasquez.
Sure thing.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you so much, Saul. That was honestly really powerful, and I think a really important conversation that you brought to City Council for sure. I'm really excited that you're on the City Art Board. I think it was definitely, I'm excited to see younger, more people of color in our committees. I know that's been a conversation we've been having for a long time, and I know it's hard sometimes, but I'm very, very glad that you're representative of the City Art Board. Thank you for being here. I do have a couple questions for you, and thank you so much, Ceci, for the presentation as well. Saul, you mentioned, I'm really glad that you mentioned the City Hall project that was outsourced to an outside artist. I think, you know, this was a really big topic of conversation when the city master plan came to us last year. And I'm curious for you, Ceci, as well, if we've seen that shift, if we've made that priority actually into action in terms of ensuring that we're prioritizing local artists for any of the projects that are happening right now.
I still think that as of now, it doesn't seem like there's an effective way that we figured it out. Right now, we're still using mostly Cafe, which is usually goes out to national calls of art. And it's actually, as I remember from being a student, it's not always the easiest tool to use to apply to these residencies and such, and to apply to these boards. And I actually had started an application for the City Hall piece myself when I was still a student, when the call first went out. But I do remember having, like, specifically because I was a student at the time, there was a lot of things that got in the way of me seriously submitting something for that project. And I think that's very true for various local artists here, that like we actually, as the city moves along and does its things and makes its choices for art, artists aren't fully aware and aren't fully plugged into those processes. And so it is often very specific people who get the chance to apply, usually artists who already have training in that kind of grant writing and that sort of application thing, which is actually is a skill that not every artist is going to have. And I don't think every artist should have it to have that chance.
Yeah, so I absolutely agree with you. Ceci, do you have any thoughts on that? And I'm curious about this Cafe portal, and if that's something that has been looked at in terms of accessibility and other options that we may be able to use.
Yes, Mayor and Councilor Bencomo, Ceci Vasconcelos for the record. Yes, this is definitely something that has been coming up regularly. One of the committees, one of the City Art Board committees, will be looking into creating workshops and having presentations that will give local artists more of an insight and maybe some tools that they can use, so that when these projects do come up on the Cafe platform, they'll have a better idea of, of how to apply for them. And I believe in looking at Cafe and learning more about it since I've been on board, you can make the calls for entry specific to your region and really limit who sees the calls and who applies. So we can, as our local artists start to learn these tools and get a better handle on how to apply for these call for entries, that is definitely a direction we can go in, instead of sending these calls out nationally.
Yeah. Ceci, have there been resources put into place to help our local artists get familiar with the cafe platform?
Thank you for that question. Yes, actually, Cafe puts together webinars that are very short and are really helpful to learn how to navigate their platform. So they're really good about doing that. So we've provided links on the website that artists can go to the webinars. They're very easy to follow. And like I said, they're short. So they just need to look at that. And, you know, if they have questions, they can always contact me and I'll find out the information for them.
Cool. Great, Ceci. Thank you. That's a funny conversation because my cafe is very different, if you all know what I mean.
Yeah.
And then, Saul, back to you. I'm curious about, I'm really glad that you brought up the Entrada artwork that is at Albert Johnson Park, right? And I'm curious about the process of when did that happen that the tribe tried to get that removed, what that process was like, and if there's been calls for, or I guess maybe my question is more is, does the city art board have a recommendation for us in terms of how to move forward with that piece of art? Because I find it highly problematic. I actually even just recently, as part of the conversation we had a few months ago, I'm forgetting the name of the street now. The issue, the zoning issue we had recently up on Sonoma Ranch. I started looking at the neighborhood and found that there's a street called Squaw Mountain Road, which is incredibly offensive and problematic. And, you know, I was told that if that street name came to us now, we probably wouldn't approve it. But that is incredibly difficult to try to remove a street sign and a street name. Although I believe that when it's this deeply problematic and offensive, it should be a lot easier to get rid of some of these things. So I'm curious, Saul, if the city art board has recommendations on this particular piece of art.
Yeah, so the art board, we actually haven't got the chance to really discuss processes of accession and deaccession. I think like those are still things that we're trying to figure out. But I do think like it's important to know what's at stake in these sort of situations. The city has had a history of also, I've said, right, removing artworks for being controversial. There is actually in one of the Anthony Pennock, and I'd have to double check when this happened, but one of the Anthony Pennock water murals a while back, I believe, contained images of the Native Americans in chains. And that was actually brought to the attention of the city by, I believe, a high school from outside of the town that was here playing a game. They brought the attention to them, complained about it, and it was removed. I'd have to double check on when that happened, but I do know that it's happened before where the city has paid to fix an artwork. I know it was, I believe it was the Ed Roybal who specifically made the complaint. I can't tell you formally when that complaint was made. I'd have to also look into the specifics of when all those things happened. But that is a conversation I have had with people from the tribe as well, about like essentially the tribal presence is, I think, very absent often in these conversations. And I am happy that lately we've been trying to include them more, but I do think that they need to be given much more leadership roles rather than just consultation roles. I think they need to be the main voices we listen to when making decisions about what kind of art and what kind of monuments we need to be putting up in our town, because essentially that's what public art will be. It's a monument and essentially an acknowledgement of a public reality.
Thank you, Saul. I would definitely love to see, as a representative of the city art board here, I would definitely love to see the city art board come up with some recommendations for us in terms of how we, I don't know what the word you used for it. I don't know.
Deaccession.
Deaccession. Thank you. When it comes to, you know, whether it's highly problematic or offensive art that you know, like, or inaccurate art. That's like the piece of the entrada. I would love to see recommendations from you all in terms of how we move forward with that. That is, you know, both respectful and effective and meaningful. So thank you. Those are all my questions. And again, I'm really glad you were here. That was a really powerful presentation.
Thank you, Councilor Benavidez.
Okay, Councilor Vasquez.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you so much for your presentation. I think Councilor Bencomo said it well. That was powerful. I think it was needed. I think having you and your perspective on the city art board is just going to hopefully be the catalyst to create new public art that's just more representative of our community. Before I got kicked off here, again, I apologize for that. We were talking about how we could use city property in existing places across districts to actually use for public art. And I think specifically looking at different neighborhoods and different communities that have different stories to tell, where different local artists perhaps have long histories or have a connection or tie to the area. I would love to, develop like community art plans, right, where those communities are represented, especially leveraging first the public assets that we have in city buildings and bus stops and utility boxes and wells and all kinds of things. So I think that'd be a terrific way to help instill that sense of authentic cultural identity into our neighborhoods. And so I think following your framework, right, of who's leading on these projects would be a really powerful way to do that. So thank you. So and then the other well, first I just mentioned one of the reasons I opposed the naming of Pat Garrett Boulevard or renaming of Motel Boulevard to Pat Garrett Boulevard was for so many of the reasons that you outlined here, right? Because of the types of histories that we really romanticize and glorify, have come and have developed, I think, from popular Western culture that is like predominantly told from the European side of things. And so we didn't end up renaming that street. And part of it was I think me and several members of the council just thought, we needed to be something more representative of our indigenous community, of our Native community or our Hispano community. So I think you have a supportive council in terms of what type of work that the city art board can continue to do to promote local artists. I do have one question for you, because this has been on my mind since our city attorney informed us of this, but I know one of the challenges in getting more local artists to participate in city commission projects is also the insurance requirement. I believe you have to have, I think it's up to $1 million in liability insurance to do something as pick up a paintbrush and paint on a city wall, right? And so I think for those local artists who may be left out of those opportunities, that seems to me like a challenge or a barrier. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I definitely feel like from my point of view has always been that, especially with the art board and with any public art project, I think a heavy influence should always be education. And I think working with teachers and with schools, especially because teachers already have so much access to our communities. They know exactly what's going on with families, directly with kids. They have really close access to the problems that our community faces. We should really be thinking about like the kind of like middle people between our civic institutions and then our citizens that we're actually trying to reach out to, and sort of like including our artists who may be hired for jobs for the city, but are ultimately our citizens. And we should also be thinking of them as the citizens that we're concerned with, not just as laborers or workers that are going to come in and give us an artwork, right? Because I think that makes it so much easier for us to just reach out to anybody and try to find the most professional artists out there to try to represent our city, which that's not the case. I wouldn't even necessarily say that the most beautiful art in our culture here in Las Cruces comes out of a professionalized art framework. I think there's so many different types of art happening, a lot of, artists who are releasing zines, having pop-ups, talking about just having conversations and poetry nights, right? Sharing poetry. And I think the city art board and the city should be putting money into those sort of events and those sort of like gatherings where like people are sharing culture, not just thinking about buying an artwork or one object that is going to give us this capital. Because at the end of the day, art, public art at least shouldn't depreciate. It's not something that depreciates. But if we create public art that doesn't represent our community, it really can depreciate our whole entire community. It can really misrepresent it. And I think that we've been seeing over the last couple of years things such as Confederate monuments being vandalized and taken down in other states. And I think we really need to think about what's the trajectory that our state is going to take in acknowledging those kinds of histories and acknowledging our communities and what they're actually wanting to do, right? Like we need to look at the artists in our community and say, what do they want to do? And then offer them those opportunities rather than just imagine ourselves what we want art to look like in the city. I don't think that should be not even the board's job. I think the art board should be as much as possible a middle ground between our actual artists and our city.
Thank you, Saul. And I agree with all you said there. I think we need to revisit that, to be honest, just because I think it is a barrier for local artists to participate in city commission projects. And our attorney, Jennifer Vega Brown, had told us in the past that we could waive that. You know, that it's not a hard and fast rule in terms of that liability, that the city council through an ordinance can waive liability requirements for certain types of local art projects. And if that helps to produce more local folks participating in city projects, I'd like to do that, because hopefully that addresses perhaps some of what you mentioned in terms of the disparity of some of the contracts that have been awarded to out-of-state artists through this system that the city uses. So hopefully that's something that maybe we can revisit. And I'll just propose it again for that Quality of Life Policy Review Committee. Councilor Abeyta-Stugui, since you chair that, maybe that's also a good topic of discussion for the future, as well as something maybe for the art board to talk about. So thank you again. I don't have too many more questions that I can think of now. I just do want to say hugely supportive of the narrative that you provided to us here and how that shapes our public art for decades to come. I will say, I think we have some really amazing growth in our local art community that is not reflected within the city public art program that I would love for the city to also embrace. I think on our public art map that we have at the city, it's relegated to, I believe, only city properties, but there's tons of great public art out there, including in Councilor Bencomo's district and my district, that I think we should, as you mentioned, embrace as a city. And put those locations on the map. So I think that'd be great to do. But so by any chance, do you live in District 3?
I'd have to double check on that, actually.
All right, we'll get back to
I'm right on the edge of 2 districts. I'd have to double check.
Well, get back to me, because I think you'd make a great city councilor here. So. Hey, well, thank you so much, Saul. I appreciate your discourse, and thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Mayor, if I may say just a quick thing, this is Ceci Vasconcelos for the record. In regards to the insurance, I just recently worked with 2 artists on getting waivers for them on some parts of the insurance that didn't apply to them. So there's definitely, we are definitely able to work with the artist in terms of the insurance. And also getting back to what to do about existing artwork. A big part of why we put together the master plan was to address issues like this. So there are some very good processes in there, and we will definitely follow those processes when we're looking to either take down existing art or maybe change things in whatever way is being requested. So just wanted to add that.
Yeah, and if I may add, actually, I think the master plan does have some suggestions for how we can do it. I think it's also a matter of us in the art board as a collective. A lot of us are new. We're all also just learning the ropes, and a lot of us are actually new to city and bureaucratic processes like these. And I think there's also going to be I think it's also important to close those gaps as well, because I think that's also something that the art board is struggling with right now is staying organized in terms of a lot of us have other jobs, families. We're just doing this out of our free time. And so all of this I just did myself whenever I wasn't working and working on my own stuff, and so it is a lot of there's a lot of, I think, also gaps there in how effectively we can do our work.
Okay, Councilor Flores.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you so much, Saul, for your presentation. It was just just as powerful as it was the first time you presented at the City Art Board. And I really want to thank the mayor and city manager for being receptive when I sent them the email about you being here today. I think, Saul, that with you and the progressive, not progressive, I don't like to use that word, and the perspective, you and the perspective that other new board members bring to the board, going to change the face of, literally and figuratively, the face of art in the city. So I want to thank you again, Saul, for doing this. It's amazing because you came to the intersections of life, humanity, and society, culture, history, and I don't think I've ever had a professor like in social anthropology be as succinct as you were. And I think that the message that you're conveying is that art is very powerful and that it's educational. And again, thank you, Saul. And I think, I know that the City Art Board is blessed to have you, and along with Elisa Grayson and Chantal Yazi Martin, and Tina Ballou at the helm, and the other board members. So I think that there's other ways to have art, local artists featured. I don't think that all the art that can be featured by a local artist I don't think it has to go through the City Art Board. I think that there are other means of doing that. Mm-hmm. Because the City Art Board deals with the public art, and it's really related in many ways to the CIP. And they're not exclusive. So thank you again, Saul, y muchísimas gracias. Dios te bendiga.
Thank you so much, Councilor Flores.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Saul and Ceci. Yeah, really impressive. I'm trying to find you. Hold on, let me, yes, I feel better when I'm actually looking at you when I'm talking to you. But thank you so much for your presentation. It was powerful. And all the while I'm thinking about how clear I felt council then was, and I think we are still the same council that approved that master plan, right? How clear we were about being as inclusive as we can related to art, giving our local artists of all shapes, sizes, ages, cultures, an opportunity, right? And so when I received the master plan, when was it, last week, I guess, I looked through it, I read it, I saw the various pictures and whatnot, and I looked through, okay, well, who are these people? Where were they commissioned? It felt like they were a lot of out-of-state people, a lot of folks that, are Caucasian, if you will, and maybe one or two, so very disproportionately, right? Are people of color, right, represented. And so I wanted to say that it concerns me because we were very clear that we wanted to, collect a directory of folks that easily we can pull from for these sorts of things. And it may not be these large projects, but from the small ones to the larger projects. And I'm not sure that that's happened, but I distinctly remember speaking to that registry, making sure, and maybe it's the cafe one, I'm not sure, because I'm not familiar with this process per se. Kind of like you all starting right in your board, starting out and really trying to understand the bureaucracy and what certain things, how certain things are laid out, if you will. But and so, Ceci, I want to make sure that there is that registry, that all sorts of people from different, I guess experiences and expertise has an opportunity to find themselves on that registry. Has that happened? And if not, when can we? Well, I don't know that it's specific to the master plan, but I'd really love to see that, because I think it would help us immensely as we move through, this process in selecting, the public artists.
Mayor and Councilor Gandara, thank you for that question. I have not seen it. I came on in January, so we've been working on the larger projects and things that need to move along. But I know that it is definitely on the definitely something that the art board has discussed and that we will be working on.
Good.
So.
Ceci, thank you. And do you have a time frame, Ceci? And I'm pushing just a little bit, with all due respect, I'm pushing it just a little bit because, honestly, I'm very proud of although limited, the work that we've done thus far. But I think you see that this council is very supportive of public art, and we want to see more of it. And, when we get, like, for example, the AC doing the electrical boxes, and I've gotten so many positive, compliments on that, people want to see more of that. And it's really exciting. So I don't want to lose sight of it, because I think that's where we get lost, right? Those people that might not ever have an opportunity. We want to make sure, and I think you understand, Ceci, because you've done a lot of work with Jamie, how we want to be representative of each of our boards and commissions, and we want it to be representative of our community. And so many times it isn't. And I think Saul, hit the nail on the head. Is like, we're so busy just living our life, right? Taking care of our kids, working, doing all these other things, that it's very difficult to get people that normally don't sit at this table, right? A part of that. And I know you've been a big help in trying to engage people in different ways.
Right. So, Mayor and Councilor Gandara, Ceci Vasconcelos for the record. Yes, definitely. It is something that we can work, I think, consecutively with some of the other projects that we have. On my end, I'm working on creating an inventory of all the city art collections, public art collections, along with the maintenance schedule. But I think in doing that, I'm probably going to come up with get connected with artists from, that have worked on projects, and also I'm excited about this city art board, because I think through their connections, we're going to find more of those artists as well, because they're their peers. And so yes, this is definitely a priority, and I can't give you a definite timeline, but know that we are working on it continuously.
Yes, thank you, Ceci. I really appreciate that. And then last, I just want to say that our master plan is a guide. It's not the Bible, right? It's just a guide for us. And so we should definitely, if there needs to be clearer definitions, Saul, even if there's resolutions, right, or something that can come to council that we clearly define public art and all the other things that you've indicated that are concerning in that master plan, please, we can do that. And you all are considered experts in my mind, in my estimate. And so we'd love, even if it meant updating that master plan just a bit, right, to incorporate some of those things. I don't think that's a problem. Well, for me anyway. And then I appreciate you bringing up La Entrada and Mr. Roybal and the issues surrounding that, as unfortunate as it is. I do want to say, and I want to publicly, apologize to Mr. Roybal and the tribe. I know they felt ignored, but I do want to say that there was a couple of opportunities. We brought them to the table. I connected a group and that included a former city manager and the assistant city manager, David Dollahan, and the group and the artists to sit and have a conversation at the table, right? To really hear from both perspectives and such. And I was a part of the first meeting, very uncomfortable, a difficult dialogue to have, challenging for sure, but a necessary one. And then I wasn't invited to the second or third, meetings. And well, since then we've had 3 or different managers, right? And it's sort of like what you're finding yourself at the art board. You're all new, relatively new, with Ceci being the newest coordinator. Like she said, I just started in January, right? Mm-hmm. So if that needs to be re-examined, explored further, please let me know. I'll tell you that there was some very strong convictions on both sides about why that was. And I have to say, I mean, I'm Mexican and my great grandmother was a full-blooded Native American and I have Spanish blood. So I have that whole, I totally understand. It's like inside just a fight, right? To understand what our history is and where we land and how we view things and whatnot. So it's one of those things that I think that is really important to me. And I want our folks to be represented and feel like they're heard and not ignored. And so I wanted to say that because I think it's important for the rest of council. It's probably been, we're a fairly new council with Councilor Betastuvi and Bencomo. And so there's been some work, but obviously it wasn't, a positive outcome, right? So I really like the idea of sharing the art board's perspective, as Councilor Bencomo asked, I thought of helping us sort of what are those processes that need to be in place in order to, take down art or offensive art, that kind of thing. And what would that look like? So I don't know if you have any comments related to that, because there's a lot to do and I get it. Totally understand.
Well, on that end, I think there's a lot of research that really needs to be done. I think what's really important for the art board is to also be very collaborative. I think working with our historic, our actual local historians directly is really important. And I also think, of course, that's why I also think talking to the tribe, because many other tribe members are often historians and keepers of their story, of their histories. Right. And that'll keep, and that's really just a matter of keeping representation honest. And de-accession doesn't always has to be removal. I think sometimes it can be done in public conversations about the things that we have and putting a plaque next to it that'll address it, at least temporarily. That could be a good fix, right? I think there's many ways about educating our community about what the images are, and then maybe letting the community at large make those choices later, which I think is similar to what happened with the Oñate. The school, right? I think it's really about giving our community the opportunity to be heard, the opportunity to have their voices heard. And I think often there's a very limited number of voices that get their voices heard in these kinds of environments. And and I think there's many different issues that need to be that come up there. I think it's never an easy one, and I will always suggest collaboration. I think at every level.
I appreciate that, Sol. I'm definitely a collaborator, and I really appreciate the suggestions, the ideas, as you say, the accession, what that means, right? What does that mean to everybody? And I'd love to have more conversation about that with you. That's an important thing. You were really impressive, Sol, and thanks so much for being here today. Thank you, Ceci, as well. And I look forward to hearing more from the art board and you, Sol. Take care. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilor Betastuvi.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Saul, for your presentation. Most of my questions have already been asked, but I do want to say thank you very much for having us remember to acknowledge those that were here before us and those stories that we need to make sure that we're being as inclusive as possible. As it's been mentioned, I am chairing the Quality of Life PRC, and there have been many suggestions by my fellow counselors today, so I've been taking notes. And if you don't mind, so I'd love to be able to connect with you after this as well, and so we can have a little bit of conversation. And perhaps it might be time for me to connect perhaps with other members of the art board too, to make sure that we are bridging any sort of communication issues. Okay, so thank you so much, and have it. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilor Flores, do you have another comment?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mayor. I want to stress that the city art board has a certain function, and what Saul brought to us was as a member of the board, he's bringing his perspective of the city art board. And the city art board, I think the master plan pretty much lays out the function. And the issues that Saul has necessarily raised today and the ones we're addressing we can proceed with having representative art outside of city art board. I mean, the city art board isn't going to dictate all the art that's going to go up in the city. I mean, it just, it has a certain function. So I just want all of us to keep that in mind. But again, Saul, I want to thank you. And I think that it's important I think it's important. Thank you so much, Councilor Benavidez. It's really a function also of the museum system. There's a lot of stuff going on. I don't mean stuff going on. Let me find a word that's more appropriate. We need our museums system to look at history and keep our history. They can do anthropological or archaeological or whatever kind of art, but not at the expense of who we are as a people. And we need to make sure that the preservation of the original people of this part of the world, either we were forced to be here, we were forced, brought over, or we were colonized, but we have to keep that in perspective because it's our history, it's who we are. And if we take that away, we're taking it away from our children and the following generations. So I just want to let people know that the City Art Board has a certain function, and it functions under certain parameters. That now taking a turn with you members such as Saul and Alisa and Chantel. And there's another new member too. There's, most of, and the thing that's really wonderful, with all due respect to people in my age group, it's really, really wonderful to have young people on that board. And a lot of energy, a lot of wisdom. It's amazing, from the babes, from the mouths of babes. And, all this love and very talented people. So thank you again, Saul, and I will be hopefully working with you and Norma Chidas and Hartel in the near future. And getting together as Councilor Benavidez has suggested. So again, thank you, and thank you, Mayor.
Councilors, let me ask you something. Are you using a desktop? You?
No.
You have a laptop?
Yeah.
Is it a city laptop?
Yeah, do you want it back? It doesn't work.
Oh, no, yeah, we need to exchange it because I know I joke with you, but every word you said was all it's scrambled. The speaker is really bad, so we probably need to have that replaced because it's
You know what?
getting really bad now.
This little baby has been in the quote shop so many times. I told each one.
Good. Let's get a
One of
new
my
one.
first directives to him was throw this thing out the
Oh,
window.
there you go. It needs to be thrown out.
Yay.
Terrible. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Here comes Ifo. He wants to say something. Look at that. He
I didn't mean
turned on his camera.
Was he a ghost? Because I don't see him. I
We've
just
been
see
struggling with our laptops, Yvonne and I.
Yeah. Yeah. Cassandra and I we got the lemons.
Okay. Maybe you guys use it.
But then you couldn't hear anything I said? You didn't hear any of my...
No, I heard. No, really. We heard. Don't know.
I still understand.
We're good.
Okay.
Yeah. Councilor Sword.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I simply wanted to say that I agree with my colleagues, all that they said about the art board and the presentation, especially Saul, your awesome presentation, very impressive. And I just wanted to add my agreement with the rest of the council. That's all. Thank you, Mr.
Much.
Very good. Mayor Pro Tem, you have a...
I do, Mayor. I'm sorry. You know, I think we're skirting with an idea, and I want to just name it. And thank you, Councilor Flores and others. You know, the art board has a very specific function, if you will, and we flirting with ideas of inclusion and equity, and we all believe it. I think for sure, but it isn't. I mean. And I think it's so definitely the art board can help in that function, but to be the board that helps us, right, navigate these waters is probably not the way to do it. And I'd really like to recommend that we have, you know, some equity and inclusion board, or, you know, hopefully move into one day having a department, a unit that deals very specifically with these things. Because, you know, over the weekend, I received a very alarming TikTok video, and then several others related to LCPD. And we have so many microaggressions, so many implicit bias, so many things that are going on, that when I see the picture, Saul, that you had there of folks, you know, hanging out, if you will, very tastefully done. You know, we as each other, we don't see each other in that way. We see as us and them, and it's so much more disturbing to me as I continue to get complaints about what was seen over the weekend. And I think it's probably out of the art board's, you know, role and responsibility, although they play a part for sure. I think that we need to really have a conversation about how we as staff and departments and council, how we see people, how our policies are affecting everyday people. Because I think it's just going to continue to get more challenging as we move on. And so that's what I'm asking for is a department, a board of some sort that looks at this and really gives us recommendations so that we can make good on it, in my opinion. So thank you, Mayor.
Okay, well, thank you. And so everybody said, and I do too, thank you very much for your presentation. I learned an awful lot today here as well. And just keep up the work.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I think that pretty much concludes our work session. And so thank you, everyone. Thank you for your participation. And I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. I'll stay on because I have an agenda setting meeting, but I need a motion.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Who made the second?
Benavidez Center.
Okay. Councilor Sword made the motion. Councilor Benavidez second to adjourn. Christine?
This is on the motion to adjourn the work session.
No, oh, you froze. Yeah. I can hear you. Can you hear me, Christine, or did I freeze?
I can hear you. I can't hear Christine though.
Yeah, that's okay. I'll go ahead and
Oh, did she freeze?
maybe.
Oh, no. She's moving. She's moving. Look, you see her?
She's alive.
She did her hair.
Am I there?
Hold it.
Yeah.
There you are. You're here.
Yeah. Well, it was me. Sorry, my dog. Counselor Benavidez.
Yes.
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 Yes, I think you called me.
I did.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm trying to distract my dog.
No, that's okay. Thank you. Yes.
Counselor Bencomo.
Yes.
Counselor Sorg.
Yes.
Counselor Flores.
Yes.
Counselor Gandara.
Yes.
Mayor.
Yes. So let the record reflect that all members voted in the affirmative. We are adjourned. It's 4:50 p.m. And I'll stick around there.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.